Eric, do we have a quorum yet?
Yes, you have quorum, Chair.
Great, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the February 17th, 2021 meeting of the Transit Commission. I'd like to start by saying a few words about the touchless fare payment system. I want to take a moment to recognize a significant milestone that OC Transpo has accomplished. As you will have read in a memo that John Manconi released yesterday, February 16th, OC Transpo has launched a customer trial for a new way to pay fares using credit cards and mobile wallets at one fare gate at the O Train Line 1's Rideau station. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge Councillor Leeper and thank him for testing the system personally yesterday. During the test period, the system can be used to pay for adult single fare rides by tapping enabled credit cards, Visa and MasterCard, and smartphone mobile wallets, Apple Pay and Google Pay using Visa and MasterCard. The modernization project has been fast-tracked so that OC Transpo can offer customers more ways to pay their fare while reducing touch points during this COVID-19 pandemic. OC Transpo is already working on future upgrades that will bring contactless debit payments to the system. During the first few days of customer testing, staff will be available in person at the Rideau station during peak periods and available through the day remotely using the video chat system to support customers and answer questions. Once fully implemented on all our buses and at all our O-Train stations, this technology will result in OC Transpo having one of the most advanced fare payment systems in Canada, giving customers flexibility to choose from a range of options to pay their fare. OC Transpo will provide further information as the project continues. Congratulations to all the staff that have been involved at OC Transpo for making this possible. And for more information, customers can visit octranspo.com. Thank you. Now, looking ahead at today's agenda, I've received no regrets. We have a message from Commissioner Williams that shall be available with us for the first hour. Could the Commission Coordinator please call the roll call?
Commissioner Brockington?
Here.
Commissioner Caricato?
Present.
Commissioner Gower?
Here.
Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Here.
Commissioner McKenney?
Present.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Suds?
Here.
Commissioner Tierney?
Present.
Commissioner Williams?
Present.
Commissioner Wright Gilbert?
Present.
Vice Chair Cloutier?
Present.
Chair Hubley?
Here.
All members are in attendance, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest before we move on? Okay, seeing none. So the minutes of the Transit Commission meeting of Wednesday, December 16th, 2020, are they carried?
Carried.
Thank you. Okay, so our first item is the Confederation Line and Bus Service update. So we'll hold that. There's going to be a presentation and no doubt questions afterwards. Item number 2 is the OC Transpo Performance Measurement and Reporting. We do have a presentation with slides for that, so we'll hold that as well. And our third item is amendments to the transit bylaw. There's no presentation for that, but there are delegations, so we will hold the third item as well. And let me see, I think the last one is status update, Transit Commission inquiries and motions for the period ending January 29, 2021. There's no presentations, no delegates. Does anybody want to hold this or can we receive it?
Received.
Received.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go back to item number 1, which is the update, and we'll now receive the update on the Confederation line and the bus service from Mr. Manconi, Mr. Charter, and Mr. Scrimger. So if you could go ahead whenever you're ready, Mr. Manconi.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to shortly turn it over to Troy and to Pat to give you their update. I do want to, Chair, start off with this morning we all saw the article regarding Miss Prue, one of our paratranspo customers. I can tell you that she's going to be receiving a call from us today apologizing for what occurred yesterday. That should not have occurred. While we do permit attendance to be in with customers or caregivers in sedans, I'm talking about cars. We've consulted with public health again, and while technically we could have 2 customers in sedans, we're not going to be doing that, and that shouldn't have occurred. So we're going to rectify that situation, but we will continue to offer customers, if they choose to have their attendants ride with them in sedans, they will do that. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, and our apologies will be going out to Ms. Prue on that matter. Mr. Chair, you're going to hear from Mr. Charter shortly on rail service. I want to acknowledge Mr. Charter and his team. They've been doing a great job working with RTM, who have also been doing a very, very good job. You're going to hear that performance is up significantly. Winter service is up significantly in terms of performance and reliability, and that's due to the hard work that they've all been doing with their winter plan. The focus, while the numbers are very good, the focus and the commitment from RTM and the executives, this is all the way up to the CEOs who met with myself and the city manager and the chair, the vice chair, and the mayor, is their focus is on sustaining it and consistency in the high reliability numbers that you're going to hear about, irrespective of the season. So we were doing some really good work with them, and our staff have been phenomenal, as have the RTM team, in terms of making sure that this system performs at the level that it's designed to perform at. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Troy.
All right, thank you very much, John. Can we put the slide deck up, please? There you go. Perfect. All right, thank you very much. So today, we've got to be starting off. You can go to the next slide, the overview slide. That'd be great. Providing an update of the performance of Line 1, as well as some information with regards to the rectification plan, and I'll be talking about some metrics with regards to system performance during weather events. I know people are very curious about the switch heater performance. I'll touch upon that as well. There's some continued monitoring that we're going to be doing. I have a slide on that. Providing an update on train wheels. We will be implementing an adjusted service plan in March, so I'll provide some information on that, and then I'll be turning it over to my colleague, Pat, who will talk about the transit recovery update and COVID-19. Next slide, please. So this slide here, you've seen this one before. So what we ended up with for the month of January, once again, we ended up at 98%. And so far for the month of February, we're about that, not just 97.9, 98.1%. So we're right around there. That gives us, 5 months of 98% or over. We're starting to see that consistency and reliability there. We're seeing it over a prolonged period of time. And, if you look back to the earlier months, you look at January, February, March of last year, 88, 90, 94%. So far this winter, we're not seeing a recurrence of those things. So that's really, really positive. We're in those winter months. We know that the winter was going to be the challenging months, and we're seeing a high degree of performance. Next slide, please. The next slide looks at the trend line, right? Once again, it sort of highlights, if you look at December, January, February, March of last year, you see that big dip, and that was power, the arcing issues. We had catenary, we haven't seen a return of any of those issues. January was 98% for the month of February. We're just over that 97%, just under 98%. So once again, we're seeing a good trend. It's continuing both on a monthly basis and a daily basis. And the reason why you're not seeing those big drops in that trend line up top there is because we're seeing fewer and fewer of those days that drop below 97% or even further. So those are the days that we saw last year that really dropped down the reliability and the average for the month as well as the day. And we haven't seen a return of those. So that's very encouraging. Next slide, please. And again, so if you recall, this slide is the combination of the previous two. What you want to see is you want to see green boxes. You want to see them above that the dotted line at the top, which is 97%, and you want to see that green box to be as little as possible, because that means there's less variability day to day. So we still are dealing with some variability from day to day, but overall we're seeing those most days we're at that 98%, 99%, and that's why you're seeing here that we're seeing the averages both on a daily and a monthly basis at that high number. So we're seeing good consistency, reliability, and we're in the most challenging time of the year for us. So that's really encouraging. Next slide, please. With regards to the rectification plan, if you recall, there was 7 major items. Essentially 5 of those items are considered complete, and then with 2 that are still ongoing. The independent assessment, which is nearing completion, there's some additional information that the assessors have requested from RTG in order to complete this assessment. Ultimately that will validate whether all the action items are sufficient. But so far what we're seeing is good reliability out of all those items, and most of them are done. So switch heaters, in the east end it was the updated or the enhanced heat trace elements, and in the east end it was the propane and the gas. In the west end, it was the enhanced heat trace. So that's all been completed, and I'll have a slide coming up that shows about their system performance. The overhead catenary system, if you recall, all the paraffils were inspected and replaced. Rigid rail adjustments were made in the downtown tunnel, and all that work is effectively complete. Vehicle traction power, that was the inductors, the line contactors. If you recall, that was the arcing events that we experienced last winter. That work is now complete as well. And and please report that we haven't seen a repeat of those occurrences. Vehicle passenger doors, that's one's been complete for quite a few months now, since the summer. That was the SIL 2 certification. That's been fully complete with regards to the isolation, the ability for the operator to isolate the door, as well as the just the ongoing functionality of the door. So we're seeing very high degree of reliability and very few issues, if any. And then, as I've reported last transcommission, the vehicle HVAC, that's done, but we've been monitoring and assessing it through the winter months and making some fine-tuning adjustments there. The 2 items that are still outstanding, that work is still continuing, is with regards to vehicle auxiliary power units, or CVS units. The updated software is in place, and then there's ongoing work to validate and once again to make some fine-tuning elements to it. And then lastly, the fine-tuning of the braking system, that work continues. So, if you recall, we talked about the CBTC, or computer-based train control software. That's complete. There was updates to the guideway intrusion detection system. Sand and sanding systems were updated, and sand was changed out. But there's still fine-tuning that's going on with the brakes. But good progress there, and we're seeing some we're seeing the impacts on our reliability of all those items, which is really encouraging. Next slide, please. So system performance during weather events. So far this year, we've received 10 events that there's been 3 centimeters or more of snow, and we've seen a high degree of reliability during those weather events. So it's not just high reliability during the good weather days, but it's also during those weather events as well. When we put this slide together yesterday, we had about it was only about 8.1 centimeters of snow. I know we received some more snow accumulation later on the day, but when we pulled this together, it was 8.1 centimeters of snow. And I'm pleased to report that we ended up for a service delivery perspective yesterday of 98.7%. That number just came in this morning once we were able to finalize the service metrics for yesterday. So good performance in all weather conditions with regards to the switch heaters. So we're pleased there. Next slide, please. Just a few pictures of what we expect to see and what we're seeing. So the first picture on the left there, that's you're on track 1. You're looking westbound from the Saint Laurent Tunnel. So if you were able to look farther down there where that red light is, that's roughly right near where you can see an overhead bridge there. That's the Belfast Bridge, and where the trains would launch in and out of the MSF. So, and that's what an operator would see. You see bare ground, you see the rock, you see the ballast, you see the track, and that's the switch heater at work, and that's what we want to see. The second picture is eastbound to Blair, just east of Belfast Road. And, I included this picture because once again, you can see the ductwork in the middle in between the railroad ties, but then just in the right of the picture, that's the gas heater itself. It's a big unit. It's fed through gas and propane, and then it feeds the heat all the way through down the length of the ties, all the way through that switch location. And then the last picture here is this is westbound on approach to Tunney's Pasture Station. So this is where we have the electrical heaters with the enhanced heat trace elements. And once again, you're seeing bare in between the ties and good snow clearing. So that's what we want to see. That's what we've always seen on. That's what we see on line 2, and that's what we're seeing on line 1. So we're very, very pleased and good performance in that regard. Next slide, please. I mentioned that there was, that there's some continued monitoring that we will be doing. So we've talked previously at previous Transit Commission meetings of track. We know that there's going to be more work done on track in when we get into spring, summer. That's the time to do this track work. But that's like any other railroad. There's always seasonal adjustments in work that needs to be made. But we're looking forward to in the spring months hitting the ground running and looking at the rail gorgation or the noise and the vibration that our customers are experiencing. We're going to be tackling that with our TG so that we start to focus on improving the ride quality comfort for our customers as well. So that work is coming, and that's something that's going to be ongoing for us. But it's not unlike any other railroad. The other thing that with regards to some continued monitoring is with regards to train couplers. We're currently looking at there's been a few service interruptions that have been identified as potentially the train coupler was part of the problem. So we're looking at that. It's too early to say that it's a trend or a new issue, but it's something that we said we need to watch. The train coupler, it's obviously it's where the two trains are connected together, but what we're looking at here, it's not that the trains are unhooking or anything like that. It's more along lines of it's the electrical connections and that feeds some of the secondary systems, PAs and those types of things that if the pins aren't aligned in that coupler, it can create an issue. So we're looking at that, and that's a piece of ongoing monitoring that we'll be doing. Next slide, please. With regards to the train wheels, wheel replacement is complete on 16 vehicles now. What I can't stress enough is that the daily inspections will continue on the entire fleet until all the wheels are replaced and or the set screws adjusted. Those inspections aren't going to go away until all the wheels on each train have been considered, that they don't have the undue stress, and that they're considered a good wheel. They've been validated through the engineering processes. RTG has received and they have installed specialized equipment at their MSF here. This equipment did have to come from Europe, and it allows us to do the wheel replacement at 2 different locations now. One, both Sorel-Tracy, just down near Montreal, and then here. So we're able to do that, and that will help expedite things. The independent TSBA investigation continues, and we're fully engaged in that. We continue to use all the experts that are available to us, and we continue to engage the chief safety officer, the regulatory monitoring compliance officer, or the RMCO, and any sort of industry experts that we need. And we continue to engage with Transport Canada and obviously the TSB for whatever they need in their investigation. RTM has advised that they are adjusting the wheel replacement schedule. That revised schedule is currently being finalized, and we're just awaiting that information now. But we have also made sure that we communicated that information to both the TSB and Transport Canada, that we are looking at an upgraded schedule for the wheel replacement. They've been fully informed and they're aware of like we have through the entire program here. We've kept them in the loop, and we've been very transparent with them, and so they're aware that there's a new schedule coming, and once we are able to finalize that, we'll be communicating that with them. Next slide, please. I mentioned an adjusted service plan. So effective the first week of March, we will be adjusting the rail service to operate on an 11 train peak period service for 2 months. So March and April, and then returning to the normal service in right now and planned for May. Due to the pandemic, we know that our ridership continues to be low. The 11 train schedule does provide for ample opportunity for customers to physically distance, and it will be, it will be a 5-minute service at all times during the day. We just won't be ramping up during the AM and PM peak periods. But the ridership is significantly low enough that there'll be ample opportunities for people to physically distance on the trains, even with a 5-minute schedule. So the impact to customers is, a minute to 2 minutes of potentially longer wait. In exchange, as a result of this service change, There's going to be savings to the city of approximately of 100,000 in reduced service payments to RTG, as well as a reduction in the electricity consumption estimated to be approximately 50 to 60,000 per month. And then, like we've said from the beginning, we want to leverage this period of low ridership to do as much as we can. So this reduced service plan, does provide RTG with an opportunity to expedite work on continuing to improve reliability. We've seen a really good trend. We want that trend to continue, and we know the work's not done. So we want to use this time to leverage that as much as possible to continue to do more, and keep that trend and that path that we're on right now, keep that going in the right direction. It gives them that opportunity, some savings to the city and some opportunities for RTG to to continue their efforts to continue to improve reliability and consistency. And now I'll turn things over to my colleague, Pat, who will talk about the transit recovery update. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Can we have the next slide, please, Eric? And the next. So far, you'll remember that in 2020, we ended the year at about 28% of our usual ridership through December. In January, with the lockdown and the provincial stay-at-home order in place and much more caution being given by all of us, our ridership was down to at 18% of normal levels, and that's across the complete system. So far in February, in the first couple of weeks of February, now that the schools are back, our ridership has been at approximately 21% of the usual levels, and we'll continue to watch that and make any adjustments that are needed. So far, we've needed to make a few adjustments to school trips where people are traveling slightly differently than they did in the fall. The next slide, please. As you know, we conducted an Operation Mask Up event with the special constables going out and riding the system on February 3rd. We saw very high compliance that day with almost everyone wearing a mask. Positive feedback to our staff. We did not need to deny access to the system to any customers that day. There were 3 fines issued to customers who were on the system and not wearing a mask. There were 67 customers that our special constables were able to assist them to understand how to wear the mask properly, and 9 of the customers that they spoke with that day were not wearing masks because of medical exemptions. Next slide, please. And since the beginning of the pandemic, 69 of approximately 3,000 of us at OC Transpo have tested positive at OC Transpo. 61 of those people are recovered and back to work, and that leaves 8 of our coworkers who are at home and recovering, and we wish them the best. The next slide, please. And that's it for me. Thank you. Back to John.
Over to you, Chair, in terms of questions.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions for Mr. Manconi or staff? Councillor Brockington?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to you and colleagues. The report is good news. I'm happy with what I've heard so far and appreciate the ongoing work that our staff and RTG and all the players are doing. So thank you. I think the true test will still come when we reach pre-COVID ridership volumes and we put the system sort of back into full strain and see if we can handle it. But as far as the rectification plan and the updates, I'm pleased in that regard. Chair, I really have one question, and I'm wondering if I can impose and ask for a slide to come back that Mr. Charter presented. I think it was his first slide showing line 1 performance. Could I just ask that be put up again?
One moment, please.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about this when we get to the performance metrics as well. When we look at this, obviously it's very good numbers, 98%. It's impossible to argue against that. It's even higher than what our benchmark is, so it's very good. But one thing that I always want to be cognizant of is the 2% of whether or not it's focused on a particular time that impacts the same people over and over again, or whether, and hopefully this is the case, it's spread out across the system, all types of days, all types of times during the day, so that the impacts to the system are really negligible, if at all. So just to clarify, when the trains have challenges, is it spread out or is it concentrated on a particular time of day?
Chair, that's a really good question because these numbers, every number has other data that feeds into it. And if I could, I want to bring some context to the 98% because one could argue that 98% looks good, but what's the other inputs into that scenario? So just some metrics, and then it finishes with exactly your point, Councillor Brockington, about impact to customers, because at the end of the day, whether it's 98, 99, 99.5, if you're that stranded customer, what's the impact to that individual is what matters. So since our last update to you in December, that 98%, here's some metrics that puts it all in perspective. 28,000 individual trips, 690,000 rail miles traveled. That's 17 times around the world in terms of distance traveled. Doors open 2.4 million times. And 420,000 crossovers on the switches during that period. That gives some context to the complexity and the variability as to where problems could occur. In the same period, I don't have the exact number, it's less than 20 occurrences of tweets that went out that said, we've got something on the line. You've all seen them. Some of you have commented and so forth. Average wait time to the customer for the impacts, because the rail service never shut down, 2 to 3 minutes. We set up diversion, and you've seen that. We send out the tweets. We say, hey, we have an issue at this location. Rail service continues. And to your point on your question is average wait time, 2 to 3 minute impact to the customer. And what we're trying to do is get our response to when there is an occurrence to drive that wait time down even further to make it as close to zero as possible. So Councillor, I just wanted to share that. And yes, absolutely, the next report that Mr. Scrimgeour talks about gets into some of that detail that you're referring to also. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, and you know I love data, so I appreciate that the other bit. So just as a takeaway, John, just so I can sleep at night, there really is nothing in this data here that we need to focus on. The 2% in this case, or less than 2%, is really spread out through the system. It's not a particular bus route. It's not a particular line of the day that's pulling that data down. It's just incidents that happen throughout the day, and it's various incidents. It's not reoccurring of the major problems that you saw last year. That's why I gave you the door metric. Think about that 2.4 million door openings, and you're not seeing, we had a door issue yesterday. They quickly reset it because of the new software on the fly, and it was minimal. Troy talked about the couplers. We're looking at that. We don't want it to become a new trend or a new issue that causes disruption to service. There was some moisture getting into them before Christmas. They jumped all over that, and they've addressed that. The brake software still is some of the issues that need some fine tuning. But again, the March scale down in service, I keep reminding everybody, we'll never have this opportunity to have such low ridership. We might as well take advantage and continue to fine tune and drive those metrics even better. Do you have any information from higher levels of government on a recommitment to helping transit commissions across the country with their budgetary challenges? Or what's the latest information we have in that regard?
Chair, the only thing we have is what came out last week in terms of the commitment from the federal government. Ms. Stephenson is meeting with the treasurers across Canada on a regular basis, and we're waiting for updates. And of course, we're bringing forward the report in either March or April to you on options for option plan C. Remember, we had A was to do the capital closeout reduction. Option B was to to add to the capital reduction, and option C was to do root cutting. So we're bringing those principles to you before the end of March to get that view, and we will have an update by then. We're pressing hard to see if we've got any commitments at any level of government. So far, we have not heard anything yet.
Yeah, Chair, my advice is, I mean, I don't want to get to option C. I don't want to put our customers and system through that, which what will be very challenging. And Chair, any direction we can give you and the mayor to try and tease out from our colleagues at upper levels to give us a sign or signals. My understanding was that announcement was mostly going to be earmarked for capital projects, but any indication that we can get that there'll be some assistance on our operating side so we can avoid going through that very challenging process would be appreciated. So I appreciate the update and the information. And like I said, any clarity we can get from the feds in particular would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. And yes, that update or that announcement last week did not include operational dollars. Staff did go back to their counterparts at the federal level after the announcement to get more clarification about what that funding is for. And but the dialogue continues. As you know, the mayor speaks with the ministers on a almost daily basis, and we've had some dialogue at John's level with bureaucrats, as well as myself with some individual MPs on the issue, but there's no announcement as yet, and they know our timeline here. We need to know before the end of March.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, Commissioner Wright Gilbert, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do have a few questions about the occurrences. I'm calling them occurrences of service interruption. So as you probably know, I do keep track of the occurrences. You did sort of allude to that. I can tell you that there have been 17 occurrences of service interruption over a period of 13 days. That's between the last time we met on December 16th and today. So this actually works out to 21% of the days where we actually had occurrences. The majority of them seem to be stopped trains. So I also track the reason with 11 stopped trains. And so my question is that, number one, stopped trains is a very generic term. So if we could get a little bit more information as to why these trains are stopped. And is it related to the issues with the train couplers? Is it a myriad of issues? I just sort of want to get a little bit more information about that.
Certainly. Troy, you can explain all those.
Yeah, so yes, I think it is 17 occurrences. I agree with that. We are, when we're sending out alerts and tweets to our customers, we want to provide them quick and factual information. Sometimes when there's a stopped train, the code that pops up to the operator, when you get it back to the MSF to the shop, and they do their troubleshooting and rectification, the code was just the symptom of another issue. That they can rectify. So that's why we've gone with the generic term stop trains, because I think the majority of our customers, they want to know how it impacts their commute, their service, and we want to get that information to them really quickly, really timely. And I don't want to waste time thinking about, okay, is it this issue or this issue? What the customers want to know is how does it impact me and what do I need to do differently? With regards to the vehicles themselves, that is our most common occurrence of occurrence or disruption on the line, and it is a variety of some of the issues. We've had some brake faults where the operator has to just go and simply what we call isolate a brake, and then the train can continue in service with a delay of 5 to 10 minutes. There's been other occurrences where due to a coupler issue, we park a train at Tunney's pasture for a period of time, and then when there's a good opportune time to get it, we will pull it off the line. There's been other opportunities where we've had stopped trains at Blair or Tunney's, and we've had a technician go to it and be able to rectify an issue real quickly there. So it really is a mixture of issues, but when we're communicating to our customers, our focus is communicating to them what the impact is on their commute and travel times, and not delay in trying to get what the primary issue is. And as I said, that what we initially see, when Alstom gets in there and RTG gets in there, start doing the rectification, they see that was, here's the code that popped up, but it's actually this issue here.
That's really helpful. And I agree with you that when communicating with customers, stopped train is an absolutely adequate description. It's generic, but it tells people sort of what's going on. And when communicating with customers, I think that's absolutely fine. However, for transit commissioners, it would be really helpful to have an idea as to what the issues are in terms of, when we've got 17 occurrences over a period of a couple of months, 21% of the days we're having problems. I think that it's important that as commissioners that we understand what these issues are. As Councillor Brockington was saying, is it one time of day? Is it one specific kind of issue? Do we see a trend? And so this information would be really, really helpful. But I appreciate that when communicating with customers, stop train is absolutely adequate, and I agree with you. I wasn't trying to imply that it wasn't. Your social media team is fantastic. I'm a huge fan of them. Just about the jacking screws. Okay. Again, learn more about jacking screws than I ever wanted to. So is the specialized equipment that's being brought in, is it to replace the wheels or is it to adjust the jacking screws into their correct position? And I asked this question because at our last meeting, we were specifically told that the specialized equipment was being brought in to adjust the jacking screws into their quote unquote correct position. So I just want to understand what this equipment is being brought in to do.
Yeah, good question. Sorry, thank you, John. The specialized equipment brought in is to replace the wheels and actually take components off them and reuse other components. So it's similar. It's exactly what we said last Transit Commission meeting, and that we're bringing in additional equipment here so that we can do that validation process. And if the wheel has been confirmed that it hasn't had any undue stress as a result of the jacking screw, we'll continue to use that wheel. We've shared that information with the TSB and Transport Canada. They're aware of that process. So that specialized equipment will help assist us in getting to a point where all trains have what we've been referring to internally as green wheels that are free of stress, that have not had any of those conditions that could lead to a crack. And keep in mind that we've continued to do the inspections. We haven't had an additional occurrence since I think it was August of this year. So the inspection process is working. We haven't seen a recurrence of any more cracks, but we're going to continue to do that. So, but that specialized equipment is helping to replace the wheels and keep the good components that we need.
Are the jacking screws being left in the wheels, or are they being replaced with the silicone plugs that were traditionally sent with the wheels? Because according to the TSB letter of November 4th, 2020, it makes it clear that this was the first time that these wheels were sent with the jacking screws in place, given that jacking screws, according to the letter, were only put in or only used when the wheel was having to be removed. So are we replacing these jacking screws, removing them with these silicone plugs?
We are removing the jacking screws, yes.
That is the best news I've heard in a long time. So thank you, Mr. Charter. Makes sense. So I'm glad about that. Just to touch briefly on what Mr. Manconi brought up at the very beginning. Sorry, that's my phone. At the very beginning of the meeting, I appreciate that you're going to be contacting Ms. Prue, about the, as far as I'm concerned, unacceptable treatment that she received. Treatment's the wrong word, but the unacceptable situation. I'll clarify that. However, Ms. Prue is not alone. I've been hearing from several paratranspo customers that they are being, essentially crammed into paratransport taxis with more than one person. One individual reached out to me and they actually were in with 2 other passengers and the driver. So, I mean, a lot of the folks who are using paratranspo, and we all know this, are members of vulnerable populations. We are in the midst of a pandemic that has increasingly virulent strains. How can our paratranspo customers feel confident that they are not going to have a paratranspo taxi show up at their home or at their appointments and and have other individuals in the car and be put in the same situation as Ms. Prue?
1 minute left.
Thank you.
Because I've issued the order. The general manager has issued an instruction, and our staff, I spoke to them this morning. And while technically we could be doing that, and it's been confirmed by Ottawa Public Health, we could be putting multiple people in sedans, we are choosing not to. And it has occurred in the past on rare occasions. And it was posted on our website and everything, but that's not Mrs. Prue's fault. This is not about, the customers didn't do anything wrong. This is on us. I've issued the directive that we will spend the extra money and send multiple vehicles for multiple pickups unless the customer wants their caretaker in the vehicle with them. So that order has been issued this morning from my office. And staff will follow that order. And staff feel bad that this occurred, and I feel bad that this occurred with Ms. Prue. She'll be getting a call from me also today. And on the buses, we do have multiple people on the buses, and we will continue to do that because there's space on that. We are not jamming people into our buses, I can tell you that. And this has occurred. And like I've said all along, what's a definition of a great organization? When you make a mistake, you correct, and you correct it immediately. And we're doing that today. And again, my apologies to Ms. Prue. And for those customers that reach out to you, whether it's on social media or directly, please send them our way because the direction has been issued today. And I can assure you it will be followed.
I appreciate that, Mr. Manconi, and I certainly will. If I have any others reach out to me, I will pass them along to your folks. On the Operation Mask Up, and Mr. Manconi, I had emailed you about this, but I just sort of want to raise this for my colleagues as well. I really appreciate the data, the numbers that you send to us in terms of the number of people that have needed masks and whatnot. If we repeat this activity, this enforcement activity, would it be possible to know the number of total interactions that took place that day so that we can have some context to the numbers that you're providing us? Is it 63 people out of 1,000 or is it 63 people out of 100? It really impacts the sort of how you receive the data and how you interpret the data. So I'm just hoping that perhaps in the next, if there is another iteration, we can perhaps have the total number of interactions as well.
I guess we could. We're trying to deploy our resources as best as possible. We are stretched on overtime costs and so forth, and it takes a lot of resources to do the mask up operation, remembering that special constables are there to deal with safety and security issues concurrently. I think what we can do is we can share some data that we have, such as we have been, since the beginning of COVID, been looking at every single bus route to look at compliance rates. And I can tell you it's at 99% and higher. And we also targeted, I believe a number of you early on in COVID said, look at certain routes. Every time you contact our office, if there's a problematic route, we actually send a supervisor and start doing active patrolling. So it's a rolling enforcement blitz, and we constantly talk to OPH. Right now, we continue, while yes, we do get the periodic report of someone not wearing a mask, we investigate it immediately, but we're not seeing systemic non-compliance. I can't guarantee you that we have the resources to start counting everybody we interact on those mask up operations, but I'll certainly take that away and see what we can do. Because I understand the ask. You want to put it in perspective in terms of very similar to what Councillor Brockington was asking on the 98%. We'll do our best.
I appreciate that. Sorry, I just have one last question. Is that all right, or should I put my hand up again?
Is it a short question, Commissioner, or
yes,
do you need more time?
It's not one of my famously long ones, I promise. It's a short one.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Just wanted to draw to Mr. Scrimger's attention, as well as Mr. Manconi, that there have been several tweets recently by Adrian Harewood of the CBC regarding Route 12 and crowding on Route 12. Is this something that has been brought to your attention other than social media, obviously? And if there's any actions being taken to address this route, just in terms of physical distancing and people feeling comfortable?
We have monitored Route 12. I've seen the pictures, and there's no systemic issues on Route 12 that's occurring. And again, operators are doing a fantastic job of describing to us if there's issues, and we have extra buses on standby. Again, another reason why we don't want to cut service. If there is some jamming of customers, we'll deploy an extra bus, and you may have seen that out there on some of those common routes where there are some routes that are performing very, very well, as I said, during budget. So no systemic issues that we're aware of, and we're monitoring a bunch of those routes every week.
I appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for being flexible with me. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you. Mr. Charter, could you just clarify one of your responses to Commissioner Wright-Gilbert about the delays with the trains? My understanding is a number of these were measured in seconds and no more than that for customer wait time. Is that correct?
Yeah.
a lot of these occurrences, as John indicated, the average, what we see, the average increase in wait time is 2 to 3 minutes. A lot of these occurrences, they occur at a terminus station where we just park the train for a period of time. And what that means is there's a small gap in service. Service keeps running through the entire line, but every train is coming, let's say, every 4 minutes. But then there's one point where a train, it's 4 minutes, 6 minutes, then 4 minutes. But the average wait time that we've seen across all those occurrences is it's 2 to 3 minutes in increased wait time for a customer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Charter. So next up is Commissioner Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few issues here. I was just listening about the paratranspo riders. I understand they have a Facebook group because I'm on it. Do you have any staff monitoring it in terms of just keeping an eye on concerns that they raise? Because just to stem it off, I believe it's also on Twitter.
Yes, Councillor Kavanaugh, I think you know how I work. We're plugged into all that stuff, and I can tell you that I've met with personally some of those people that are raising those concerns, and they have direct access to myself, Mr. Scrimger, Mr. Gordon, Mr. Greer, and when Troy used to run it, Mr. Charters. They have our email addresses and so forth, and we encourage them, post all you want on Facebook, but the best way to get action is to come directly to us. It's like the article yesterday. I can tell you, I didn't even get a chance to respond to that media article because it was just raised to us. So we can only act when we know of information. So I encourage people just to reach out to us. Nobody at OC Transpo wants to disadvantage anybody using our service, in particular paratranspo customers. And some of you know that we leave nobody behind. We've sent special vehicles out to rescue people if they're in a jam and so forth, because we care very, very much about our customers.
Thank you. One of the issues that got raised, it is in terms of cleaning. I know you've been telling us about how your cleaning is very important, but what the issue that came up was on shelters, and people are hanging out in them, I guess. And I don't want to describe how bad they were, but your staff got to it, but it took a little while because I don't think people realize how bad it got in some of the shelters. Has this been a problem that we've seen, or has it just been isolated that I happen to come across?
No, you're right on that piece also, Councillor. So look, I'll give you a real example. This morning we had a customer that was asleep on a bus, and the operator went and woke them up, and that individual said, look, I'm COVID positive. I've got to get to a hospital. So we had to isolate the bus, deploy cleaners. We are seeing, unfortunately, homeless people or people that are disadvantaged taking shelter in some of these shelters. And you hired 64 additional cleaners. You approved that in the budget. They're deployed all over the places, facilities, buses, and so forth. Again, if there's hotspots or things that you're seeing or your staff are seeing, please get them to us. But you're absolutely right, Councillor. We're seeing some of those throughout the city. We're seeing it in LRT stations. We're bending over backwards and really trying to take care of people. Some people are really struggling out there. And so we're not kicking them out. We're reaching out to our social services partners and helping them out.
Thank you. In terms of the COVID-19 update that you've given us about drivers, et cetera, and you're reporting, you're always really good about getting the reports out and what bus routes they took, et cetera. Are we seeing any patterns? Are we doing any research on how they got COVID, or is there anything that we're seeing that is being researched on how we can prevent this in the future?
Yes, we have a COVID task force that was established at the beginning of COVID for the department, and we are OPH is part of that team. They do contact tracing. Obviously, I can't share publicly what some of the issues are. Some of it is most of it is activities outside of work, and so there's only so much we can do to control that. But the same messages that Dr. Etches says to everyone is, wash your hands, distance, all those things is we are not seeing any traces of work being either at the buildings or in our vehicles being a contributing factor to COVID for customers and for our employees. And public health is all over that with our team in terms of stats and analytics.
Thank you. I have had reports about staff, the operators not wearing masks. I haven't had one lately, I have to say. I don't think I've had one since before Christmas. But I've always passed them on to you, and you know about them. So I appreciate that you're on top of that. My next question is about the GPS app for when buses arrive. This is obviously not a busy time, and is this a good time to make sure that it's up and running and implemented? We've talked about this last year, and so that when we see the numbers that the buses are 98%, but it's people standing out there and seeing that their app is telling them the bus is about to come is important. So that's the information that we need.
Yes, Mr. Schneider can give you an update on that if you like, Councillor.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, we are continuing to work on that, as we've talked about before. There's multiple steps in the process. I think we've spoken before that the first is the data that are collected on the bus. Obviously, GPS is a measure of where the vehicle is at that moment, and that's a solid piece of information. The next is the comparison between where it is and where it was scheduled to be at that time. And then the next step after that is to give a prediction of when it will arrive, how long it will take to get to the point that the customer is working about. And each of these is a separate calculation. Knowing where the bus is, how it compares to where it's scheduled to be is calculated in our dispatch system. And we've been working for quite some time. It's a very complex system, but we're replacing a life expired system. And so over the next number of months, we hope that our system is fully tested, fully ready to go, and we'll be moving over to a more modern system, which gives us greater confidence, greater precision, and it's better math on the comparison, on the prediction. The next point is how we transmit that information out, how we publish that on our open data feed, so that it feeds into the all the different apps that pick it up. And that is a system we're helping the app developers to transition over to a new, more modern, we're calling it API 2.0. I think some of you heard about that a couple of weeks ago when one of the developers had some questions for us. So that we're moving the way we transmit the data, publish the data through the open data feed over to that new API. That will allow us to bring in the better data from the dispatch system when it's ready. So these are both things that we're working on all the time, continuously, and we'll get them there when we can, and then we'll go back into another cycle of improvement. The next is for the OC Transpo app itself. We're always looking at what's the best way to publish the data on our own app and on our own webpage. And that work continues. But for the people who don't use our app, they have a wide variety of choices of independent apps or our own app that they can use depending on how they like to see the data presented to them.
I recall it was something about BlackBerry was going to be involved. What happened with that? That they had some system. Is that did that happen?
They came to us and we talked to them, and we haven't heard much for a while, but maybe we'll try getting back in touch with them and see whether they moved on to other important things during COVID or something like that.
Okay, so basically our system is being changed over, so we're still waiting for that process to happen?
Some of it's already happened, and more to come. Okay,
thank you. I really appreciate hearing about the new fare payment system. I think that's great. I think the easier it is to get onto buses, the more likely people will be. If they didn't have the right, if they didn't have a ticket or a Presto card before, they weren't going to be able to get onto a bus. So I think this is a big step forward. I didn't see how much it cost. How much was that system? I don't know if I missed that.
It's included in we have a contract with Scheidt & Bachmann to add the ticket machines, add the fare vending machines to the line 2, to the stage 2 stations as they come on board over the next few years, and also to replace some life expired components. And it's all bundled in that one contract. The total contract, the capital cost of that total contract is $17 million, but this is just a tiny part of it.
Okay. I also appreciated the news about the federal aid this week, and following Councillor Brockington's comments about the dollars. I'm just wondering about if we're looking for the long term, how we're going to make up fare revenue, because it's clear that they're not ready yet, and we're going to keep those conversations going. And I know Chair Hubley is interested in that, to keep talking to the feds about operational costs as well. But in terms of the now, we clearly fare revenue is not reliable at the moment, and it may not be for a long time. People are not going to be buying monthly passes anymore. They're going to just come and go, probably just once or twice a week, going down to offices, things like that. So are we rethinking our dependence on fares?
45 seconds left.
Councillor Chair, that's over to council as a policy direction in terms of fares, and that's for council to decide if they want to direct staff to revisit fare policies.
Yeah, fair enough. It would be helpful to see the recommendations of it's not fitting. But we do welcome those federal dollars, but we also have to look at what's turning people off going on transit. And I appreciate the new system of making it easier to get on the transit with the cards, but also the costs. And anyway, something we can continue a conversation on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next up is Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Manconi, thank you for the presentation. Very informative. When you and Mr. Charter spoke about the average wait time being 2 to 3 minutes, and this goes back to something that Councillor Brockington said. So if you know an average wait time and you know when the service was not delivered, it indicates that you've at least made an estimate of the number of passengers that were affected. Is that correct?
Troy?
No, Commissioner Olson. What we're looking at is by station, what the average wait time, increased wait time is when we have an occurrence. What is the increase from the schedule in terms of the train arrival? So we're not looking at it from a customer by customer basis, looking at it from a station by station basis. Train was supposed to be there at 8:01. It was there at 8:02. The next train was there at 8:00. It was 1 minute off or whatever. So we look at it station by station, not customer by customer.
Commissioner, are you looking for customers impacted index?
Well, and this actually goes to the performance part of the meeting today as well. And the excess wait time, I know that Boston or the MBTA actually uses the same kind of measure. They weight theirs by an estimate of the number of passengers affected. Are we doing the same? And I can come back to this during the performance.
No, great questions. I would suggest that you talk about that under Pat's report on performance measurement, and we'll tell you what, again, we're part of those international benchmarking groups, which speaks in spades in terms of all these elements.
Okay, thank you. And one other question. You mentioned that you were reducing LRT service for a couple of months. Ridership is still down. Notwithstanding the fact that some bus routes are actually seeing strong ridership, certainly empty buses around the city are a fairly common sight. Given that the pandemic is likely to be with us until the end of the year, I would say the restrictions are likely to be in place until the end of the year, if not beyond. Is it possible to consider reducing bus service a little bit or even more than it is now?
That's all part of the report that we're coming to you with in terms of funding and Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. Plan C being the worst case scenario where you choose to do reduced bus service. We're going to have the criteria for you on that. Plan B is a further cut of capital programs, and Plan A is that we get all the funding we need to carry us through to the end of the year. So that's all coming.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your questions. Next up is Councillor Gower, please, followed by Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. The ridership level in February so far 21%. How is the ridership level being measured right now? What tools or techniques do you use to measure that?
We have a number of sources, but the most reliable sources that cover the entire system are fare sales, pass sales, counts of how much money or how many tickets are in the fare box, how many times the Presto card has been tapped. We also use counts that are being taken electronically on buses and on trains where we need to measure for that. But for the day-to-day, it's really number of Presto taps is the biggest of all sources.
And I believe at our last commission meeting, you gave some idea of percentage ridership in the core versus in suburbs, or maybe it was off-peak versus peak. I'm not sure, but do you have any more details you could share about the ridership in different parts of the city or different types of transit use?
The downtown-oriented trips are generally experiencing I won't say lower ridership, a lower proportion of their normal ridership than the non-downtown routes. We're seeing the highest percentage of normal ridership on routes that serve hospitals until, from September to December, routes that served shopping areas, and in February, routes that serve schools. The downtown-oriented trips, the university-oriented trips are at a lower proportion of normal. They still might be carrying more people in total volume because there's so many people traveling to those locations. But we have some routes that are carrying 5 to 10% of the number of people they would normally. We have some routes that are carrying 50% of the people they would normally carry. Okay. I don't think we have very many, except for perhaps some individual school trips that are higher than that.
Yeah, that 21%, it's an average, I guess, across the whole system. I'm not sure it's really giving us a good picture. So I hope that as you prepare the report around the rest operational plans for the rest of the year, we can have some more granularity as to not just an average, but more region by region, or more information on what that 21% actually breaks down to.
We will, Councillor. Pat has done some amazing work, not just by route, but also by sector. And we're working with Steve Willis's group as terms of, we know what areas have returned to work when the stay-at-home orders aren't in. He's done a really, really impressive job of dissecting the data, because we know if you're going to be in the discussion zone of cuts, you're going to want every bit of data to know how things are performing in your wards, citywide, geographically, and by mode. And he's got all that. He's done an amazing job. That's all part of that comprehensive report.
So related to this question, what I am seeing in suburban Stittsville is that the peak service buses are at a significantly lower capacity, and what you've shared would support that. My question is about, is there flexibility for operators? For example, on an off-peak route on an afternoon heading home, if they hit the car park and ride and there's no one left on that bus, do they have to continue for the rest of the route? Or similar, if they were going to Innovation or to Fallowfield and there's no one left on that bus, do they have to continue the route? Is there a meaningful operational savings if they don't continue on that route and then just proceed on the most direct route to their next starting point? Like, is there a reason why the buses are continuing on their set routes, and could we save any meaningful amount of money by giving bus drivers the flexibility to cut a route short if there's no one on that bus?
Pat?
Mr. Chair, the biggest question there is that we don't know who's waiting at the stop that's around the corner. So there might be nobody on the bus as it gets to, let's say it's the 262 arriving at the CARP park and ride lot. But what we don't know is whether there's someone who's around the corner on Kimini or on Kittiwake who wants to go down Westridge. We don't know till we get there whether there's anyone waiting. If we cut that bus short, we run the risk of missing a customer and imposing a long wait on them and some disappointment. There are some cases where a bus is coming in the morning, for instance. If the bus gets to Westboro and there's nobody on it, nobody going to Tunney's, and there's a need for a bus to get back somewhere else, then it could do so, or it just doesn't take the time to drop anyone off. That's something that we used to do when the buses went into downtown. The other question is there a meaningful operational saving? The saving would really come if that bus is late, if we would be paying overtime to that operator, if he or she came in, 10 minutes late to their normal time. If we cut it short, they could come in on time, but there's no real saving to getting the bus back to the garage early, except that, it's easier to start on the inspection and maintenance of the bus. But the big question is, you just don't want to assume that there's nobody waiting. When you can see the next stop, that might be a good choice.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. So next up, Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to turn my attention to the adjusted service plan that was mentioned. It talked about going down to an 11 train schedule. Now, am I mistaken? But I thought that at our last update, I think it was Councillor Deans who asked about reducing train service for savings. We were told that we have a contract with RTG, and what we pay them is what we pay them, and that's the service that they are contracted for. Seems to me this is a change in that, in what we were told. And the 100,000 reduction doesn't seem like a lot of money for taking all those trains off for 2 months. So maybe I get a bit of an explanation on that as well. And also the electricity consumption, 50 to 60,000. Do they not pay the electricity consumption, or do we? I'm just unclear how there's any savings and why we would let RTG off the hook again, so that they can, continue to, improve the train that they were supposed to deliver to us.
Yeah, no, great question. And Councillor Deans was bang on when she said, go back and ask them, the partnership deal that she referenced and so forth. Technically speaking, RTG doesn't have to give us a dime. And I can tell you that their starting point was, no, we're not paying you anything. I squeezed that out of them. I said, I want some money out of it. And the best I could get was $100,000. The electrical costs, we pay all the hydro. That's the way the contract has been set. We pay all the utilities, the water and the hydro and so forth. The last thing we want to do is pay them, and then they would put a surcharge on that. So it's better for us to manage those utilities. So there was no way I was going to reduce the service and not get some savings. You've all spoken to me about looking after the nickels and the dimes, and that's what we're doing. So this does two things: saves us some money. The service impact, we're still under 5 minutes service. There is lots of space on the trains. I've already seen some tweets about people worrying about jamming up those trains. There's lots and lots of room for people. And I want to Councillor Brockington's opening point. The last test was, let's get through winter. Check, we're done. Now let's take this time when our customers come back, and they will come back. They'll come back in different shapes and forms and different rates. Let's get this as best as possible. And every railroad across North America is taking advantage of these lower ridership times. And so we're doing all that. So yes, absolutely, Councillor Deans raised that. I pushed RTG hard. I thought it was a great idea. And you're absolutely right, Councillor McKenney. Technically, they don't have to give us a dime. But we're here to take care of the taxpayer and the bottom line. And so it's better than nothing. And I don't see it as letting them off the hook. We want good service. You've given me a mandate to make sure that they give us what they're committed to deliver on. There's a bit of a reduction in payment. They were not happy about that, I can tell you that, because they wanted zero. So we're doing the best we can for our customers, for yourselves, for the taxpayers, and for reliability.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree. It's not nickel and diming. This is kind of penny and nickeling, maybe. $100,000 is our only reduction in payment to RTG for taking off. What is the normal number of trains down to 11 over 2 months? 100,000. It's like, I don't think that's pennies a trip, really. It just seems like they're getting away again. And I've had this conversation with you. We let Alstom off the hook all the time. We let RTG off the hook all the time. And this, might want to argue 100,000, sure. I mean, this is a multi-million-dollar service. And we're going to go down to 5-minute headways for $100,000. It just, they are so getting off the hook here again. So no kudos here to RTG for this. I just want to be quite clear. This is less than nickel and diming. So I'll leave it at that. I find it insulting, actually.
Well, there's one comment though, with respect. I'm not letting anybody off the hook. You'll see in due course, they have had pennies paid to them. And so I'm the one that has been saying no for a year and a half. So I disagree with you respectfully that I've not been letting anybody off the hook. And you know that, you and I have had frank discussions on that. With respect to doing what you've asked for, you were commenting about getting the brakes, accelerating the brakes, the crack wheels, sorry. This gives us that opportunity. So we're trying to do everything that you're throwing at us. And as I've told the executives at RTG, use all that time in March to accelerate the crack wheel replacement plan. We had a good, healthy debate at the last commission meeting on that. But the one thing I will not let stand is I don't want to hear that I've let RTG off the hook. I've held them to their contractual obligations.
Sorry, Mr. Manconi, as a council, as a commission, it's not about you. I've said this to you before. I don't know why you always come and defend RTG, but it's not about you. As a commission, when we agree to this, we are letting RTG off the hook. They are reducing service significantly to repair something that they allowed to happen, that they're under a service contract to us, and they're going to give us back $100,000. So with all due respect, as a commission, we are letting RTG off the hook once again. It's not a personal thing. It's not about staff. It's about the decision that we make. And the decision that we make is going to be wrong here, but we're going to make it. I'm certain, because we make a lot of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire. Monsieur Manconi, j'ai une question pour vous au niveau financier. On a vu l'impact, puis je sais que vous avez parlé, évidemment, vous êtes dépendant de la situation financière des gouvernements provinciaux et fédéraux par la réduction des usagers. Mais je suis intéressé par ce qui se passe avec le programme universitaire, le UPass. Je sais qu'en début d'année, vous m'aviez parlé que des négociations avaient lieu entre OC Transpo et puis l'équipe. Et puis par la suite, évidemment, là, on est rentré dans notre processus budgétaire, puis on a perdu un petit peu le fil des idées. Est-ce que vous pouvez peut-être nous donner un aperçu? Est-ce qu'on a des étudiants qui, oui, peut-être sont à la maison, mais ont demandé à garder la passe universitaire? Puis sinon, ben, on parle de combien de pertes financières, puis comment on planifie quand la pandémie sera un petit peu plus stable, là, puis on s'en sortira. Comment on revient au programme UPass? Alors, pourriez-vous nous donner un petit peu un aperçu? Parce qu'on parle quand même d'une 60aine de mille de passes. C'est quand même très significatif.
Oui, monsieur conseiller. Le UPass, c'est une part de le budget avec le revenu de les tarifs. C'est tellement important. Je pense que c'est 30 millions de dollars. Alors, parce que l'école ne sont pas dans classe, ils ne sont pas obligés à donner l'argent de ça. C'est un gros élément de le revenu qui n'existe pas. So the UPass is a big component of our revenue gap. And yes, they're entitled under force majeure clauses and legal clauses not to pay us those funds. We are, like yourselves, very anxious to see not just the federal government, but also the universities, what decisions they make in terms of returning to school, because the UPass was a guaranteed revenue stream that we always want to have. And so I know the universities like them, but it's too early to tell right now. So it's a gap. And so, you know, our revenue streams are down, not just the fare box, the UPass, advertising, and so forth. So it's all part of that challenge that Councillor Kavanagh was talking about.
So do you have a number? Is there a number of students that actually kept the UPass, or?
Pat would have that or could provide it. Pat, do you have any comments? Do you have current numbers, or could we give it to them?
We have numbers at the end of every term. We tally how many, the universities tell us how many passes they sold, and we know how much fare revenue has been transferred over. The arrangements with each of the universities and colleges is different because they have their own arrangements with their students, their own contract with us. But yes, we track it all, and we've reported it before, and we could report it again at the end of this term. That would be a retrospective report on what did occur during the winter term, how many UPasses were sold.
Yeah, no, I think it'd be interesting to see how many students actually ask for the UPass ultimately. That's an interesting number. And then maybe a little clarity on how to get it back on track post-pandemic, if there is any risk for council and the commission to know about. I think that'd be helpful, Pat and John.
Agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, seeing no other questions, concludes the update presentation. Is this update, oh, sorry, Councillor Deans just put her hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I just thought I'd follow up on Councillor McKinney's questions, because it just doesn't seem like enough money. I'm just curious, how much money is RTG saving by reducing the service?
So their position is they're actually not saving anything because they got to keep everybody on staff to do all the work that they're doing. So they're not laying people off. They're not reducing services. We pushed them on that envelope also. And so hence their position of their original offer was zero. And so, yeah, that's,
there's got to be wear and tear on the line, the vehicles, and maintenance related costs. I mean, how can it be, I don't think it could be zero.
Well, they're going to use all the time to do the wheels. They're going to use all that time to finish all the rectification issues. So it's not like they're downsizing staff. They're going to keep the staff there. They might even add staff, is what they're telling us.
Are they compensating us for all of the problems that they've had with, like, we bought a new service and we've got a bit of a lemon. I think we all know that. And now they're going to use the time that they should be running trains to work on continuing to rectify the problem. Have we been compensated in that way for that?
Councillor, I apologize. I can't remember if you were here for the FEDCO update, and there's another FEDCO update coming. Absolutely. We've held lots of money back, and we've held back payments, both operating and also capital and so forth. So again, I apologize. I don't know if you were back for that last.
Send me all of that. I'd just like to see the big picture on the finances, because it does it does seem like, you know, a significant reduction in service for a nominal amount. Like it almost doesn't seem worth it.
Fair enough. The FEDCO update will give you all those big numbers that you're talking about in terms of what we've held back and what they've paid us and so forth.
Do we do any costing of what it costs every time we run a train on the track? Like the actual cost of putting that train on the track? Like, do we know that when we go into a negotiation with an RTG? Do we know what the actual value is?
You're talking about on the bid proposal at the concept stage and
No,
so.
I'm talking about now, like what is it costing to run that service? Like if we were to break it down per vehicle cost of running the service, do we know what that is?
Well, we know the costs that we pay them. We don't know their internal costs. We're not privy to that information.
So if we took what we pay them and broke it down, how many trains are running on that track, we could come up with a cost per train of running, what it costs us to run that service.
You could, but your numbers would be off significantly because you don't know the profit margins they're building in. And remember, you've got RTM at the top, and then you've got the subs below. You've got trickle down costs, profit margins within their entire construct, and so forth. So you'd only be guessing is
Yeah, but I'm just saying from our perspective, what it's costing their taxpayers, what we pay for that service, we could have a cost, what it costs us on a per train basis.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so would that be too much trouble to get?
Well, I can give you the math right now. You pay just over $4 million a month for the service. You put out 15 trains in the morning, you put out 13 in the afternoon, you put 11 during the weekend. And then you step up and down at the off peaks.
Right, and right now the service is every, how many minutes?
It depends during the day.
5 minutes is the standard.
Less than 5 minutes.
And at peak time?
Sorry?
At peak time, the standard is what?
Less than 5 minutes. There's a train under 5 minutes.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Deans. Mr. Manconi, just to follow up on that, the purpose of the shutdown is because we want to accelerate the work in case the ridership numbers start to grow as more and more people get vaccinated. There is a potential for a return to the service of the ridership. So what we're doing here, what your mandate was going into this discussion with RTG, was how can we advance all the work that needs to be done as quick as possible so that we are absolutely ready when the ridership returns. Is that correct?
Yes, it's all part of it. Yes, sure.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that concludes the update presentation. Is this update received, commissioners?
Received.
Received.
Thank you. Okay, so our next item is the performance measurement reporting. We have a brief presentation with slides, and I believe there's some delegates to this one as well. So we can now receive the presentation from Mr. Scrimger.
Thanks, Chair. John, is there anything you wanted to say first?
No, you're good to go, Pat.
Okay, thanks. Eric, can we have the presentation, please? Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, you've read the report on our performance measuring and report recommendations, and this presentation is to give you an outline of those recommendations. The discussion is back. Well, let's go to the first slide and we'll see what kind of background we can talk about. The motion that came at the end of 2019 to add the system performance metrics to the council priorities, and that we be established to, or that we be directed to establish a reporting protocol to come back to the Transit Commission twice a year. But the longer term background is that we suspended reporting during the years of construction on O-Train Line 1 because there was so much variability between what service was running from one year to the next. It was very difficult to make comparisons. And we committed at that time to come back with a set of recommendations on how we should measure the performance of the transit system with the multimodal system in place, reflecting that most customers are using both train and bus for their trip, a difference from what they did before. So that work has been going on for several years. The chair established a working group of commissioners to help us with that work, and we've been working for the last year bouncing ideas off them, talking to them about what's most important, what they think is most valuable to the Transit Commission to make policy decisions, and to know what our customers are experiencing, and to get their fingers on the pulse of the system. So we could have the next slide, please. The steering committee that I mentioned was consisting of 3 members of the Transit Commission, and they've been working with us over the last year. That report feedback was very important to us to put these recommendations together, to sift through some of the many dozens of measures that were possible down to a small number that are easy to read, easy to understand. And so I think the steering committee members will be speaking on this themselves afterwards, but these recommendations, while they are recommendations from staff, we believe they are recommendations from the steering committee members as much as from staff. Next slide, please. Now, one of the important things that we do, which is important in 2 ways for this work, is that we participate in a number of transit industry associations, both general associations like OPTA for Ontario, CUTA for Canada, APTA for North America, UITP for the world, but also specific measures that are specific associations or groups which are specific to measuring and reporting and benchmarking, like GOAL and COMET, which are listed there. And we also follow very closely what the U.S. Transportation Research Board does. That's a massive academic and industry cooperation on all things related to transportation, not just public transit. But these things are important for 2 reasons. One, that we can compare and get inspiration for what our measures are. And then second, so that when we do the measures, because we're doing them in a consistent way with what other transit agencies are doing, we can compare how we're doing on a subject with how Vancouver or Winnipeg or Boston is doing on their measures on the same aspect of service. Next slide, please. Through our research, in addition to the work through those organizations, we also reached out directly to 22 transit agencies across North America, shown on the map, and got information from them and talked to them in more detail where necessary about how they measure, what they measure, how they've found, what experience they've had with different ways of measuring aspects of their service. Next slide, please. I mentioned that we're a member of GOAL. That's the Group of North American Light Rail Systems. This is primarily a U.S. Group. It's run actually out of England, but it was primarily U.S. members with their light rail systems. But they've added Canadian members in more recent years, and you can see Edmonton, Calgary, Ottawa, Toronto on that chart. This is looking at light rail. One of the things about the nature of our O-Train, especially Line 1, is that we need to know about light rail on the technological side. We need to know about subways and larger metros on the ridership and volume side, because we're partway between the two. So we're a member of this group. On the next slide, we're also a member of COMET, the Community of Metros, which is we're one of the absolute smallest members, because we're in a city of only 1 million people, and we're only carrying, pre-pandemic, we're only carrying 100 million customers a year. We're on this same group with cities that have huge transit systems, unlike ours completely, like Shanghai, like Sao Paulo, like London, New York, Moscow. But they're happy to have us there, and we're happy to learn from their experience, and to bring together, as the organizers of this group do, all of the measures so we can see how our experience compares and how our future experience might reflect what these other big cities, big cities are experiencing as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we We are in these benchmarking groups, which include some of the largest transit agencies around the world. We exchange ideas, we exchange best practices, and we do annual benchmarking exercises. Next slide, please. So as we are developing measures, as we're making recommendations to first to the steering committee and then to you, we have some questions that we are asking as we look at the possible measures. Is the measure straightforward? Is it easy to understand? We want to make sure that it's not complex to the point that it's abstract. Does it properly reflect customers' experiences, good or bad? Can the measure show change over time? Can the measure be compared with other transit systems? And we'll come back to that as we go through some of them. And can the Transit Commission use the measure to consider policy decisions? And so for each one of these, as I show them to you, we've got a little scorecard at the bottom as we do a performance measure on our performance measures with tick marks to show where it is straightforward and an example of what the Commission could decide based on how they see the measure and how they see the change in time, change over time of that measure. Now we'll go through each of the measures. The next slide, please. They fall into 4 categories: safety, ridership, customer service, and service reliability. You can see them listed there, and we'll go through each one individually. Next slide, please. We'll show some examples, just some charts of how this could be presented. I just want to remind you, these are not measures yet. We'll be coming back to you with the first of these reports after you tell us whether these measures are appropriate for you. So everything you see on charts is artificial. It's not real. There's just an example of how we would tabulate the number, how we would show the numbers, how we could show trends over time. So please don't look at any of the graphs trying to look for meaning. Next slide, please. So first, under the category of safety, we would report on the customer injury rate. These are it would be injuries per million customer trips. We would take that by looking at the number of injuries related to the transit operations, divide that by the total number of customer trips over that period of time, monthly or annually. So things that did not occur as a result of transit operations activities would not be counted. So a medical emergency, if someone had a seizure, that would be unrelated to transit operations. On the other hand, if somebody tripped and fell on the stairs and had to be transported to hospital, that would be counted as an injury. The next slide shows a couple of things we could do with that. One is we could look at how that changes through the year. We might be able to see whether the injury rate is, for instance, higher in the winter when sidewalks are slipperier. We can, or on the right, you can see how it changes over time. We could look at whether I've got a different customer injury rate one year to the next. The next slide, please. So the next category is ridership. And the most basic one we will show you that you're familiar with, that we've been showing for years, is bus and O-train ridership. So ridership on the complete system except for paratranspo. And this we define as the number of linked trips. So that's a complete trip that someone makes from their home to school or from work to home, regardless of how many vehicles they take on that trip. That's to maintain consistency with how that measure has always been reported in Canada. And we'll report that monthly and annually. Next slide, please. And there's you've seen these graphs before. These are very common. So we'll go to the next slide, please. The next is we'll report on ridership per capita. How is our ridership in Ottawa changing over time related to the population of the service area, so the population of the urban transit area. And we'll do this measure once per year and report it to you. We will also be able to compare it to other cities across the country. Next slide, please. An example, we'd be able to show you how ridership per capita is different in different cities. We'll, at the time we present it, we'll also present to you any cautions we have. Every city is a little different in its geography, and every city needs to count its population differently, whether it's counting who's inside the municipality or not. So in the case of Ottawa, it's really one metropolitan area of Ottawa plus Gatineau, but we will talk about OC Transpo ridership compared to the population of Ottawa. Next slide, please. We'll also report to you paratranspo ridership. We'll report this monthly and annually. This will be a total analysis of the total demand there is for paratranspo service. So we will report to you on the number of requests we have to book a trip, the number of trips we are successfully able to book, and any difference between the two, the total number of trips that we deliver to customers, and any difference for the two. Basically, if customers find they don't need that trip anymore, but we're not able to rebook that capacity to someone else. Next slide, please. Now, moving on to customer service, we'll report to you the number of customer service contacts we have by contact type. We'll report that to you monthly and annually, and you'll be able to see how trends are changing between whether people get in touch with us through the phone. You won't be surprised that we'll have very low numbers now on ways that used to be quite common, letters and faxes. Now it's phone calls, emails, visits to the website, and open data calls for the real-time information. Next slide, please. We'll report to you on the average time to answer those inquiries. So if it's, for example, a paratranspo call, how long it takes for us to answer the call and respond to the customer's booking request. If it's a written response, how many days it takes for us to get a response back to the customer to close the issue. Next, please. Now, the next group is service reliability. So the first of those is service availability. And this is the percentage of the scheduled bus and train service that has been delivered as planned. We will do this by calculating the ratio between how many hours were delivered and how many hours were scheduled. This will be the same as the numbers that you saw from Troy earlier. Now, when I say service hours, I want to be clear that this is not hours of the clock. This is hours as a, if there's one bus out for 1 hour, that counts as 1 hour. If there's 10 buses out for 3 hours, that would be 30 hours. So we run about 2.2 million hours of bus service per year. And we'll report on how much of that has actually been delivered. And we'll go to the next slide, please. And that'll always be a number that's in the high 90s, unless there's something dramatically wrong. The next slide, please. Now, these are about the reliability of service. The previous was about whether the service is operated. The next is what's the customer experience on how long they had to wait, and whether the service was frequent and on time and regularly spaced for them. So the first is a new measure we haven't used before, but is common and is being used increasingly by large city transit systems, and it's called excess wait time. And what it represents is how much time customers would have to wait more than they should if everything was perfectly on time for frequent service. So this is going to be for services that operate every 15 minutes or more frequently, train and bus. So it will encompass all of our train operations. But an example here is if a service should be running every 5 minutes, it should come at 9 o'clock, 9:05, 9:10, 5:55. That would be perfect. But you know that bus operation is subject to variability as it goes through congested traffic, as it goes through traffic signals, as it goes through busier or less busy stops. So what can happen with that is instead of it being 5:55, it can go 5:546, 4673, 772222 if things bunch up. And whenever that interval between trips, whether it's buses or trains, is longer, that increases the average waiting time. So we'll calculate that both in minutes and as a percentage. So we'll say customers on frequent services are waiting X number of minutes longer than they would have if the service was coming exactly on schedule, or such and such a percentage on top of what they would normally experience. So that's excess wait time. The next measure on the next page, there's an example of what it might look like, and we'll show you some real numbers when we do our calculations. The next slide, please. Now the other is on-time performance. So this is routes that are less frequent. This is for bus routes that run every 16 minutes or less frequently, where what's important is not the regularity between them. It's did the bus come on time or not? Did it come at the time that we published in the schedule that it would come? So we're recommending that this be measured in the percentage of trips that leave a stop, a major stop on the route, where the trip is counted on time if it leaves no more than 1 minute early and no more than 5 minutes late. And this is a measure that there's a lot of, we've had a lot of experience with measures of this sort. There's a lot of discussion, there has been a lot of discussion across the transit industry, but this is the measure that is being recommended across the transit industry, and where many transit systems are coalescing on this measure of it's on time if it comes, if it leaves that stop no more than 1 minute early and no more than 5 minutes late. The next slide, please. We've published numbers along these lines before, and we can do that in a number of ways. The next slide, please. The next is paratranspo on-time performance, where we will again give this as a percentage, the percentage of trips that arrive within the 30-minute window that we've quoted for our customers. So paratranspo different from the conventional bus and train service in that it's customized for each person. When somebody books their trip, we will say, we'll have that trip there for you sometime. We will get there between 3:45 and 4:15. And that's the time we quote. And if we get there, if the bus arrives and picks them up on time, it will count as a yes. If it's not within that window, if it's after that window, we'll count that as a no, and we'll give the percentage monthly and annually there. The next slide, please. And finally, on service reliability, we'll report on elevator availability. This is the best measure we can have of the uptime for accessibility features in the transit stations, especially in O-train stations. So is an elevator available? If the elevator is not available, it will bring that number down from 100%. Our newer stations, all of the stations on line 1, or most parts of the stations on line 1, and any new stations we're building, we're putting in dual elevators, so there's redundancy. If one is ever down, the other one is available. And this would only count as a failure if they were both down, because that's what would represent the inability of a customer who needs the elevator to travel from one level to another. So let's move on to the next slide, please. And the next. So as directed by Council in 2019, we will be providing a report on these measures twice annually. Our aim right now is to bring the first of these to you in April, reporting on the 6 months, or reporting on the 12 months from January 2020 to December 2020. And then we'll come back to you 6 months after that with the report from mid-20 to mid-21. And then we'll come back to you 6 months again with the full calendar year 21. When we bring you these numbers, we will not just provide the raw numbers, we'll also provide a commentary and a summary and what is the meaning and some of the questions, if we're seeing trends or if there's anything particularly concerning, worrying, or anything that where impacts on any specific group of customers is overrepresented above the average. The next slide. We'll also report to our customers on octransport.com. We'll do that monthly with the measures that lend themselves to being published monthly. Some of these just don't show a lot of change, so they'd be done annually. So we'll publish these monthly so that everyone is able to track them. We won't provide the same depth of analysis and discussion on our online reporting as we do to you. And the next slide, please. And that brings it to the end. So I'd like to thank you for your patience in hearing all this. Thank especially the commissioners who helped us to discuss and select and recommend these measures to you. and be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Scrimger. I believe Councillor Gower, as part of the steering committee, wanted to make some comments before we go to delegations.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The steering committee was the chair and Councillor Suds and myself, and I believe we held our first meeting just before the pandemic restrictions began. But it has been a very interesting process working with Mr. Scrimger and his team, seeing the smorgasbord of different types of reports and measurements that transit systems use across North America and the world, and trying to hone in on what is relevant and important for us as an Ottawa Transit Commission. And the challenges around that, Pat touched on some of it. We have a system that includes rail and bus. We have frequent versus not as frequent trips. We do want to benchmark to other cities in a meaningful way as well. This is really important to us as commissioners. I checked again one of our terms of reference. We're tasked to ensure the development of a safe, efficient, affordable, accessible, and client-focused transit system. And it struck me over the last 2.5 years that we really lack the data right now to be able to do that as efficiently, as effectively as we should. So I think it's important because the data that we're tracking helps give better definition to what those terms actually mean. But it also allows us to evaluate and to better articulate to transit staff what our expectations are for the system and make better decisions around policy and funding. So looking forward to the discussion from fellow commissioners around this today, but I think we're off to a good start with the report that's in front of us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. Councillor Suds, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chair Hubley. I'd just like to, again, similar to Glenn, express my gratitude to Pat and the team that really have poured a lot of time and energy into making sure that we have measures that will be meaningful as we move forward. So just a big thank you for the effort that's gone into this. And I think it will serve us well as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Suds. So in correspondence, I'd like to acknowledge that we received a letter from Jan Lamb. I believe all commissioners have received his thoughtful suggestions. And our first delegation today is Laura Shantz. Laura, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Laura Shantz. I'm a transit rider. I use OC Transpo on about a weekly basis right now, and I'm also a board member of Ottawa Transit Riders. I'm very happy to see a return to performance measurement. I know that many riders, myself included, felt very frustrated and rather isolated in the time when we didn't have performance measures. We understand that, you know, there are hiccups when we were trying to build the system out, but at the same time, as a rider, it feels good to be heard, to have some understanding of what's going on. So we're happy about that, and especially for paratransport trips as well. The lack of performance measurement made us feel isolated, but we're hoping these high-level statistics will be an important part of understanding rider experience. But for us, for people who are riding transit, that alone is not enough. We need more than just the high-level experience. A good example we can think about is, what about overcapacity buses? So I see this particularly riding the numbers 12 and 14 pre-pandemic, and we assume that one day we will return to these rider levels, that we will once again have lots of people on the bus, things like wheelchairs and strollers. Often, you know, a bus can be packed for wheelchairs and strollers that you see people not able to be boarding the bus, even if the bus is meeting its consistency targets. If we cannot get those riders on the bus, to me, that is still a service failure. To me, that is still letting customers down. And we need to figure out ways to track and measure this so we can ensure that should, for example, we have a time of day when the accessibility seating is very full, that we can figure out a way to accommodate people. I think that's very important, and it's something that our metrics right now aren't quite ready to deal with. We also, I'm just wondering, my question for you would be, would there be disaggregation given like maybe in these semi-annual or annual reports based on parts of the city where we're seeing issues? If we are, just so we can have a better idea. I understand that monthly metrics will not be having that, but it would be good to be able to have some kind of commonality. And once again, this goes back to my point that as riders, we would like to be having a little more input. I know we also had mentioned, for example, last month again, I think we mentioned there was a fair working group mentioned that was once again members of Transit Commission. Once again, this performance measurement was prepared by city staff and members of Transit Commission. I see, and I respect the fact that we need to be linking with established metrics, but I think if we could also include the rider experience in these options, through Ottawa Transit Riders, a group that's trying to represent riders, or through forming a working group that includes not just citizen commissioners, but also average riders who could give some input or at least submit to these groups. It would greatly improve basically the confidence in the system. We still know there's a lot of issues with confidence. In terms of the working groups, you know, it would be nice that the public had a little more information about their mandates and what's going on. I'm very happy to see this report. It's just, you know, in terms of building confidence back, we talked about building confidence back in the base. These are ways that we're suggesting that this could happen. I'm also wondering, based on the report, if OC Transpo will be working in the future to narrow the service window for paratranspo riders. I understand it's very difficult to get an exact timing down and that these are not planned routes, but at the same time, we know that folks often have they're trying to get to appointments from one appointment to another, and to have a 30-minute window every time is very challenging for those riders. And it would be a great way to increase equity by providing a little bit more careful timing on the service.
1 minute left.
Thank you. So I think those are my main comments. It's just, you know, I think this is off to a good start. My questions just revolve around how we can better accommodate rider experience and make sure that we're not missing things that are happening on the micro level. So example, those overcrowded buses that can't take folks in wheelchairs. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any questions? Okay, Councillor Kavanagh first, please.
Apologies, I appreciate, I meant for the presentation, I'm sorry. But since I'm here, thank you, Laura, for being part of it. I do hear from individuals about their individual experience. It's hard to capture that stuff. And I think it is important that we keep in touch with persons like yourself on just checking what those experiences are like. It's hard, we get big picture, which is important, but I just, your views are important. I think that Mr. Manconi would agree on that. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Pat, I do have a number of, my questions are not to the delegation. My questions are on the report. Mr.
Okay, you had your hand up for the delegation.
I apologize, I didn't take it down.
You want to come back on, okay, so no more questions for the delegation. Thank you, Laura, very much for your thoughtful suggestions, and I'm sure we will consider them. So thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we can go to questions of staff. I believe, Eric, nobody signed up late as a delegation or anything?
Correct, no last minute registrations.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I started a list here with the ones that were hitting the buttons early. Councillor McKenney, you were first.
I didn't think I was that quick, but thanks, thanks, Chair. Appreciate it, and thank you to staff for this report. It's actually a very good report, and I think that going forward to be able to get these performance measures back to us so that we can understand the trends where we're headed is always better than anecdotal evidence, which is what we've been kind of counting on for I guess about 6-7 years now. So really do appreciate it. Just a few quick questions. I I noted under the measure of ridership, the way you're going to measure that ridership performance is through fare revenue reports rather than automatic passenger counter. I think it's called APC system. Is that because we just don't have enough of the passenger counters available to give us a decent number?
It's partly for that reason. By using fare revenue counts, it gives us a number which we know is absolutely right. We know how many dollars we have received from customers, whether they've paid by buying monthly passes, by paying an individual fare in cash, or by paying an individual fare by credit card, or by using a Presto card or any of the other means that are available. We know exactly how many dollars we have. What we can then use some factors that will calculate, turn those back into how many of those people were of different demographic types when they made that trip. What kind of pass or what kind of fare what kind of pass did they buy? What kind of fare did they pay? So that's for the system. It's exactly how many dollars did we bring in, and therefore how many customers did we carry per month, per year. We use the automatic passenger counters for a much more detailed, for diagnostic. How many ons and offs do we have in this hour or on that trip or in this zone? And those don't readily lend themselves to being scaled up to a system-wide measure. They will, we'll have multiple data sources by the time that we have automatic passenger counters on all of our buses. They're on, we're buying them on all our new buses. So within the next few years, they'll be on all the buses. They're already on all the trains. We will have fare gates at all of the stations. So we'll get the different data sources. We'll get how many people are passing through the fare gates, how many people are stepping on and off through the doors of the trains and buses, and how many people are paying fares. And that'll just make all of our calculations more robust, and we can have more confidence in them in the future.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I think it's really important too, because to look at the passenger counters, because even in our conversation that we've had up until now in your last presentation around, what buses have very low ridership, what buses have got higher ridership, what buses carry people who absolutely need to use the bus, they don't have another option. I think that that's all going to be exceptionally important as we come out of the pandemic. Is there a risk to our gas tax revenue from either the province or the feds as a result of the decrease in ridership, or is that based on our proportion, like how much our ridership is in proportion to other cities?
It's, the calculations from the province and the federal government are a combination of the population of the city and the number of customers that the transit system in that city carries. So, the cities that have the highest population, Montreal and Toronto, have the highest transit ridership. But there are cities of we've got very high transit ridership, so we get credit for not only being a big city, but also having high transit ridership. As that changes, that could change the federal and provincial allocation of their gas tax revenue. But I don't know that they've said. I know they haven't said what they're doing with those calculations during this pandemic interruption.
Okay. The paratranspo on-time performance of 30 minutes. Is there any way? Do you see any way of reducing that to 15 or 20 minutes? I understand why there is, there is a gap, but 30 minutes just seems so long. Because then if it's late, it's, 40, 45 minutes.
Well, what we're doing in this report is we're recommending to you ways to measure and present information on the service as we deliver it according to the service standards you've set. We're not recommending any changes to service policy in this report. We're rather reflecting the service policy as we make these recommendations on how to measure it. So a question of whether to change service policy on how paratranspo service is delivered to do something other than the 30-minute window, which you've had in place for many, many years, would be along the lines of whether you wanted to change any of the other service policies that guide us. So we're not recommending a service policy here. Rather, we're recommending the measure that reflects the current policy that you've given to us.
But that measure at some point could lead to us changing that.
And that's I think exactly what Commissioner Gower was talking about. What are the measures that will best help the Commission to consider in future the kind of policy decisions that you might be confronted with or might raise?
What's our elevator availability today? Like, how many redundant elevators do we have in our new transit stations?
So the new stations all have redundancy. Sometimes it's redundancy of 2 elevators beside each other. Sometimes it's redundancy of a different path that a customer can take to get from one point to another. The older stations, however, think of Billings Bridge Station, an older station on the Transitway, has 1 elevator to the northbound platform, 1 elevator to the southbound platform. When that elevator is down, maybe it takes 2 hours, maybe it takes 20 minutes, maybe it takes 3 days to repair, but we lose time, and we have to make other arrangements for those customers during that time, and the customers have to go through the hassle of the alternate measures that we have in place to get them to where they need to go. So our new stations, all the stations on line 1 have that redundancy built in, and all the new stations that are being built for line 2 also have that redundancy built in.
Excellent. Open data, is it available right now? Is all open data available so that residents kind of can build their own apps for when transit is available? Do we have that completely open? I think there was some discussion about it last week, and I just was following up on that.
It's published. There's we've got a team who's ready to help developers with this. There's a lot of information on octranspo.com of documentation of how the data are published, what it means, how you can work with them. I believe we've got about 70 different apps and web pages that are regularly picking up and publishing the data. There's a few that everyone knows about, but there's a lot of people, people have written something to extract and use and republish that data in a way that their clients find value.
Okay. Last question. I know you're going to be reporting back twice annually, and with monthly numbers, but what about the more granular measurements, like weekday versus weekend, impact of a weather event, that sort of thing, so that we just understand what is driving some of the measurements?
Certainly we'll provide that in the commentary that goes with, we don't want to just provide data, just publish data with no meaning behind it. So we will provide commentary for all the data. What does this indicate? What influenced this? What might this mean for the future? How did we react when operating the system? We'll provide that information. But the more granular, every departure of every bus from every station is being recorded. We have millions and billions of data points, and there is so much data which are being tracked by our control center as they manage the systems, by our analytical staff as they look at things like, when do tires need to be replaced, how many people are using that bus stop. An incredible range of data are being used for all sorts of specialized analysis in running the system. But what we're trying to do in this report, and what the working group, the steering committee, has helped us to do, is what are the system-wide measures that we can bring to the Transit Commission that will help you to understand the state of the system, how customers are experiencing it, and how you might make or consider changes in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Pat. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor McKenney, just to clarify, your hand was up during the presentation, and that's why I thought you wanted to ask questions of staff. So I apologize if you were just
No, it's
at me.
okay. I took it down and I put it back up, but I tried to go really fast. So I guess I was the fastest. I was quicker than my colleague.
Thank you very much for your questions. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Chair. And first, I just want to give my thanks to the working group and staff. It's a long time coming, and I appreciate the effort that has gone into this. It's very appreciated. And as Councillor Gower indicated, we really, as transit commissioners, can't do our job without data. It's data that allows us to see both aggregately what's happening, but also to pinpoint issues and trends and work with staff on, there seems to be a trend with this issue. What's the problem? How can we work with you, whether it's resources or policy or what have you? So I really appreciate this. I have a lot to say. I want to just go through it in order and ask Mr. Scrimger some questions. We'll start with the customer injury rate. Mr. Scrimger, why a rate and not hard numbers? When I see your data 6 months from now, a year from now, you could give me a rate of 2.4 and compare it against last year, 2.3. What value does that number have to the commission versus if you show me an actual number? There were 817 injuries in a year, and you can break it down by month. You can break it down by the type of injury. That data gives me a lot more information that I need, because as you said in your table, certain times a month, slippery stairs in a station, on a bus, maybe a bus stops suddenly, people fall, bonk their head, whatever. That data is much more useful to me than a rate per se. So I want you to help me understand why a rate is being suggested and not actual numbers.
Sure. So first of all, the actual numbers would be, you know, any injury is an injury too many, and any so we'd always have great sympathy for the person who incurs an injury, and there'd be a detailed system, a detailed safety follow-up on any injury to understand why it occurred and what could be done to reduce the likelihood of that recurring in the future. I think there's two strong values of a rate that a raw number, an integer, wouldn't give you. One is the ability to look at change over time. If we know that there's a certain number of injury rate per million customers happening in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, on through 2025, if you looked at it in a 5-year, a 10-year window, you would know whether the trend is constant, whether the trend is going up, whether the trend is going down, or whether there's up and down and there's no trend at all. And that could lead you to reach conclusions like, the trend is going down, that's good, we must be doing the right things. It's going up, why is it going up? Is it going up because of any influences, or is it going up because something is missing? It also would allow you to compare ourselves against other cities that measure in the same way. So we might be able to say, look, Ottawa is safer than system X, but is not yet up to the standards being set by system Y. There's room for improvement. What do we need to do to get to as good as another system as we continue on our quest to be the best in every way? So those are two things that that a rate can give you that a raw number couldn't, because you'd have no context for it. The raw number might be valuable for other reasons. The raw number will always be available. But our recommendation for what we repeatedly bring to the Transit Commission and where we publish the trends over time is the rate per million customer.
So a rate won't help me. As a transit commissioner, I look at data, a rate will not help me. I need to see the actual number, and we need to understand what the injuries are. You've always been preaching about comparability with other systems, but that's for your reporting. You can take data and you can translate into whatever unit of measure you need. you do that now, and you can do that in the future. And I'm not opposed to that. But as far as publicly releasing data that a layman can read and understand, a rate doesn't give us that information. It doesn't give me that information. I want to see numbers, and I want to understand what's causing those numbers. And the fact that we're only going to publish people who are hospitalized or have to go to the hospital, that's not good enough. It should be people who are injured, who are seeking assistance, who need first aid, who have been injured either in a station or on a bus that's been reported. That's an injury. My brother fell face first on a fare box when we were kids, blood everywhere. We didn't go to the hospital. He was injured. I see people fall on buses. They slip, hurt themselves. They need to be taken off. An ambulance isn't called, but we should record that because it's the cause of the injury that we need to capture and fixing that. So again, the number is very, very important for me.
Councillor Brockington, you raise a good point. What I would suggest is if Mr. Scrimger could circle back with legal on that, because there would be privacy concerns with giving out public information about every single accident, that they could identify the person. So if we could just find a way to protect that information and still get it to you, then that would be worth considering. Is that okay, Mr. Scrimger? Could you undertake that?
We can look at that. I'd like, Mr. Chair, if I can, to make one other comment, and that is that if for all of these measures we're talking about, these are not the only analysis that is done for all of the reports, all the measures that we're recommending to you. But talking about the safety one, the full safety assessment and analysis and follow-up and study is done for every injury that occurs, large or small, on the transit system. We have a very good safety management system. We have an excellent safety management team led by our chief safety officer. They follow up on all of those things. They do all that work. What we're recommending here, what the steering committee is recommending here, is what are the policy numbers that or what are the overall system numbers that we can report to the Transit Commission to inform policy decisions and know the state of the system over time and as it compares across the system, across the country and around the world. So Councillor Brockington's points are valid, but my recommendation is that this is not the venue in which that kind of incident by incident discussion occurs.
So I'm not asking for an incident by incident. We're looking at data of why people are being injured. And if there is a consistent trend, we address it. So I'm not looking for personal information, any identifiable information. And if we're going to limit it to who goes to the hospital, that's not enough. There's many more people who are injured. So that's my point there. When it comes to route reliability, again, we're talking about rates. I want to give an example in my ward. Just any bus route. Local bus route, Route 90, I estimate runs 30 times a weekday, 20 times on the weekend, over a month. This is just an example, 750 runs. Here's the information that I'm looking for, because you can look at this in the aggregate. I'd like to know for a route or all bus routes, how many buses were on time, total percentage, the buses that were late, total percentage, and how many buses were canceled, total percentage. Basic data. It's very comparable against other routes and the system as a whole. And that way, yes, on time, great. Late, all right. We want to see if that is variable by season or over time, but obviously that needs to come down over time. And buses that are canceled, we need to get that information. And again, calculating a rate doesn't give us that data. So Mr. Scrimger, can you talk about this, please?
All of those data are available and we'll be happy to share them.
But will that be part of your reporting out for performance metrics?
What we do right now, I mean, to some degree, there needs to be some level of summarization. But we are intending to continue with what we do right now, which is to report on every route individually, routes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all of them individually on our reporting on the website, and just as we do now.
Okay, so I'm not warm and fuzzy with that answer. I'm not sure.
Chair, maybe I could help. The short answer is we have a lot of data, and we are more than happy to give whatever level of data commissioners want, both, again, citywide, geographically based, route based, everything else. This is our first cut at a performance reporting system that we all know if you do 1,000 metrics, you won't have anything. You won't be able to focus on anything. I remember, this is the beginning, and this thing can evolve. This thing, who knows, there may be some metrics that work well for you, some that don't, or you want more, or you want less. Nothing's cast in stone. This is the beginning of it. And I think, Councillor Brockton, you're bringing up great points that I've heard from other councillors they wanted at that level. Remembering that we can always drill down. The question becomes, to Councillor Gower's point, as a commission, what's the reporting you want, at what level for now, and it can evolve, and we'll make it as good as we can as we move through. Remembering that, as Councillor McKenney said, we've been on pause for a number of years, and that was intentional. We brought a report because the previous scorecard, lots of hours aggregating all the data, not one single policy decision was made, not one budget decision was made, not one service change was made. And so what Pat has brought to you is, this is our first cut, and we're wide open to either changing it today or down the road. I just want to leave that message that nothing's forever, and it can evolve. This is the best cut the working group did based on what we're hearing from others. And what you're hearing from across the world is, how safe is your system? How reliable is your system? All the metrics that Pat gave you today at the executive level for in our case, our board or our commission. We can evolve as we move forward, and but the data is available. This is the summary point.
System reliability, I'm not putting safety aside, but reliability is one thing our customers is at the top, right? It's even more important than the price. That can be debated, but that's certainly my feeling. And if we have the data already, I think aggregately, all bus runs in the system, you bring us on time, late, canceled, and then you compare over time. Because if the cancellations go up or the lates go up, we say, John, Mr. Manconi, what's going on here? And then if there are route specific problems, a local councillor can get in that with you as a side. I don't know if as a whole we need to do that, but aggregately total, that's the data I'm looking at. Because if there are trends that are going bad, that's, I think, the role of the commission is we bring that to your attention, what's going on. And I will have a better understanding with that data than a rate. A rate has some value, but not what I'm looking for when I'm trying to pinpoint problems in the system. So that's why I raised that. With
30 seconds left.
How many?
30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay. So that's basically the theme of my comments about we calculate rates. Pat uses it externally. There's some value internally, but I need to see numbers that will never divulge a customer's information or their identity. That's not what I'm getting at, but it's looking at the data overall, comparing it past years over time. Then you can start make some conclusions and pull out problems. So that's what's going to help me. And I think there's more value and a greater understanding for the public to get that data than if we calculate rates, because you don't really understand unless you provide all that information in footnotes. So I'd be happy to sit down with Pat and just share my thoughts. And I'm not trying to make it more complicated or convoluted. I think it can complement what you're proposing without taking away anything that you're proposing, and just give us a little bit more information. So if you're open to that, I'd be happy to sit down with you before council.
It's time.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Brockington. I think at this point should also say, as part of the steering committee, what was direction that was provided to staff at the start of this was look at what other systems are doing and try and find as many key points as possible that you can report in the same manner that they do, so that we can then compare ourselves to other systems. The intention, as Mr. Manconi and Mr. Scrimger said, is to take direction from comments such as what you're providing, Councillor Brockington, and have this information evolve.
Yeah.
Whether it evolves in the quarterly or annual reporting to commission, or if it's direct to you as the ward councillor, that will get determined based on the questions.
So
Okay.
Chair, is staff willing to sit down with me? I want to make sure our time is best used.
Mr. Scrimger, is that possible?
Of course, always happy to meet with any commissioner.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next up, I believe we have Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate we're moving in this direction. It's hard to know where you're going unless you've got some numbers to work with to find out where we are right now. When we talked about doing this, I saw that we're down to the very low numbers, and I wanted to get an idea of who's using our system in the absolute necessity times of COVID, where we know that daily commuters are not there, but there's essential workers that are there. And that's one of the things I'm hoping that we'll be able to find out is who absolutely needs our service, because that's who's using it right now. And part of that is I want to know the areas where they're coming from. We do have people that we know the numbers for the low income passes, how many were bought, etc. But do we know the areas that people are coming from and what routes they're using? Because I want to make sure that those are the ones that are the least, problem free, because those are the people that absolutely need this service. And this is an ideal time to find that out. Will we be able to get that kind of information?
So, Mr. Chair, some of that type of information is available, and we're aiming to bring quite a bit of that kind of information to you as part of the report that Mr. Manconi mentioned earlier on how you could consider policies and principles if you were to decide to make major service adjustments. That kind of analysis we've been working on. Certainly valuable for long-term questions of transit planning and transit finance during the COVID pandemic and the recovery from the pandemic. On the other hand, bringing another group of complex measures to what as Mr. Manconi described it, what we're trying to do here is get a dashboard where the high level things can be seen and where long-term trends and big policies that go beyond just the COVID period can be compared. So there's a tension between the two of all the information that anyone would want to know about a particular circumstance, in this case a time, versus what we want to see long-term. We don't have perfect data on those things, but we have a lot of data about where what type of fares customers are paying, where people are traveling to and from, what parts of the city, what parts of the network are being used the most. We don't have complete information about that because we don't know everything about our customers. We know basically what kind of fare they paid, where they tapped their fare. So we can we're going to do some maps that we'll show you in that report that Mr. Manconi mentioned that's coming to you in March or April. And you might see at that time that, hey, this is really good. Why don't you consider adding that to the performance reporting as well, if you want to see that kind of measure long term. But if that's something we only want to see for the next 18 months or 2 years, maybe you'd want to keep it as a special purpose measure.
I think it's still valuable. I think of it as a baseline. I think it's the rock, a solid foundation of our system is the people that are using it now, because they are using it regardless of COVID. And so I think we need to give a lot of respect to those people. So that's what I was getting at. to ride the system. So we want to make sure we have solid respect for that, and we know who they are. But one of the things that I find is that you can track the ones that are using the getting low income passes, for example. But I find most low income people prefer just to go once or twice, like they budget and they use the system and go once or twice a week, so they don't have to buy monthly passes, etc., if they can help it. And I'm quite interested in that, because I find that that's a lot of people. They're trying to save money, and so they're trying to avoid buying a pass. Hopefully that new system will be helpful, that it'll make it easier for people to come and go on buses. But I just want to know how that figures in.
Well, any fare that's paid using a Presto card, we have the details of it. If it's a discounted fare, so we offer, there's, as you know, from the fare tables that council approves, we've got discounted fares for people on low income, discounted fares for seniors, discounted fares for people on ODSP, discounted fares for youth. We've got the UPass for people who are attending universities and colleges. So we know from each of those taps, whether it's in many cases where it's monthly pass, or in others where it's a single ride fare, we know if that fare type has been tapped, that person who's making that trip had those qualifying characteristics. So we'll be able to draw some conclusions and show you that.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure that's what's understood, because I'm concerned about the future, and I want to make sure that core group is respected, and that we view this as our base of our transit users. So I just wanted to make sure we have that view, so that we always make sure that they're the most important users of all, because they're so loyal, and they need it so much. So that was the point I was trying to get across. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Next up is Commissioner Wright Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I only have one main question, though it may spawn others. We'll see. When we're looking at the key performance indicator for safety, it's being measured solely by customer injury rate. And there's been a lot of discussion, and I agree with Councillor Brockington's points about defining injuries. But what I find is missing from this performance indicator is a customer's feeling of safety on our transit vehicles. So, for example, safety can't simply be limited to a narrow scope of whether or not someone was injured physically on our transit system. Harassment, for example, of all kinds, is a threat to our customer safety and negatively impacts their experience. I know we're also measuring customer experience. So is there any consideration or discussion to including reports of harassment in our KPIs?
Yes, we did. It should go without saying maybe I should just leave it go without saying that any harassment, any feelings of discomfort, any feelings of insecurity are unacceptable, and something that we need to work to prevent, diminish, and get rid of the causes of them, or discourage them off the transit system. And we've been doing a lot of work in all of those fronts over quite a few years. What we were looking at here is, how do we measure that? Is there a way of measuring it that is that can be consistent over time, that can be compared with other systems? And we'll measure them certainly for internal purposes, for analysis, for response. All of those things are done. The question is, what can we report to you that we can report consistently, and that you can draw comparisons with over time, or in comparison to other systems. And we did not find a particular measure on that, as much as we looked, that we could recommend to you as being a solid recommendation on that point. We have tried in the past interviewing customers about safety and about their feelings of security. And that has has worked as a measure, but it didn't prove to be something that we could consistently say over time was comparable. We are going to continue to look, as I say, we're engaged in all of these benchmarking groups. They're all got the same concerns as we do, and if something emerges that we can recommend to you as a good, consistent, repeatable way of measuring that, then it's exactly the kind of thing that we would want to bring in a future expansion of this approach.
Okay, presumably OC Transpo does receive reports of harassment, negative interactions, those types of reports regularly. I mean, I as a woman, I have been harassed on an OC Transpo vehicle. I've been assaulted on an OC Transpo vehicle. I can admit that I have not necessarily reported every single instance, but I have reported some. So my question is, if we are receiving reports from customers through our various reporting channels of harassment of all kinds, whether it be gender-based, race-based, regardless, any sort of harassment on our vehicles, if we are receiving those reports, why are we not able to report out on that in some sort of performance indicator, and to give us an idea of where we've received an increasing number of harassment reports on a specific route or at a specific station? That would allow us as a commission to take a holistic view and to say perhaps there is a need for increased enforcement or increased presence at these stations or on these buses to help our customers feel safe. Safety is not just simply whether or not you slipped and fell down a staircase. I agree, that's important. But safety is also feeling confident that you are safe as a human being on our transit system. And I think that's our responsibility to have those performance indicators publicly available so that the public can see that we are concerned about this and that we as a commission can make recommendations about this. Are we able to include reports of harassment in our current proposed performance measurement?
Chair, the commissioner makes a bunch of great points, and if I could just go back in history a little bit. So number one, we have all that data. We did some amazing work with Hollaback, WISE, and Women's Group a few years ago. In fact, when Chair Deans was the chair of the Transit Commission, where there was concerns about, was there, exactly to your point, what were the rates of harassment on our system-wide, vehicles, stations, and so forth. And we actually created a task force group. We actually won a national award for the first online anonymous reporting that you've seen ads for all over our system, where you can report, because one of the things we learned through that is not everybody wants to leave all the information. So we use all that data for strategic deployment of our special constables, of our surveillance team, Ottawa Police, and so forth. And that's why when you see, even recently, I think last week, there was OPS put out video footage from our cameras. They use our system to identify where there's been sexual harassment and so forth. So short answer is we absolutely have that data. Again, the working group looked at all the options and scenarios, and if in the future we want to include some of those things, we can absolutely do that. But I just wanted the commission to know we have the data. We have one of the best systems in the industry. Others are modeling it, and we do use it for strategic deployment to pinpoint problem areas, as you described, Commissioner Gilbert. So it's a very important point, because you can say you're as safe as you want to believe you're safe, but unless your customers feel it and believe it, then that's all you've got is just words. So we do have the data that our special constable units pinpoint and deploy resources to on that front. So again, it's all part of, we're looking for your guidance. If this isn't the report that you want to see different ones, we can cater it to the needs of the commission.
Thank you. I guess my point is that, and we can have a further discussion offline if that's helpful about this specific issue. But if we have the data, then it should be in our reporting. It should be in our performance indicators under safety. If we have the data.
We're here to listen if that's what you want. We worked with the working group, Commissioner. So this is the first cut. And again, we're not saying no to any of these ideas. Okay. The only thing we would say is at some point it's too many metrics and you get lost in information overload. But again, the working group did a phenomenal job, and I'll let them speak to it if those are things. But if there's direction from Commission to add different performance measures, we're open to it.
I'll just say this, that I understand that, if there's too many metrics, we'll get lost in data, but I don't think customer safety should be subject to that. I think that relying simply on a performance indicator that is dictated by whether or not someone fell and had to be taken to hospital, that has no impact on how I feel as a customer, as a woman riding public transit. I want to know, as a commissioner and as a customer, that OC Transpo and this commission are considering harassment to be a threat to customer safety and are doing something about it. So however I have to get it done to get harassment included in this performance indicator, I'm open to it. If you want to have a discussion, if you want to have a meeting, I'm happy to talk with the working group, whatever. I will do whatever it takes to get this included in this reporting mechanism.
All you have to do is move a motion, and we'll follow the direction of the Commission today on any of these. If you want to add performance metrics, we will absolutely do that, Commissioner. I'm agreeing 100% with you on the harassment indicators. We have the data, and if that's something that Commission wants on the report card, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Manconi, just following on that, I want to make sure that the message that is left here today with our ridership is that if there are cases of any harassment being reported, those are dealt with immediately as operational matters, correct? They may not necessarily be reported up to us as a commission, but your team, your safety officer and your special constables and that all deal with these reports as soon as they come in. Is that correct?
Immediately. We had one the other day about an elderly gentleman that was not liking what he saw on the bus, and we used the video footage of the bus and of the stations, and we pinpointed it down. It's immediate response on all these. It's tiered response in terms of the severity.
Great, thank you. And I know I'm aware of some other cases that you've reached out to parents of young people and so on to answer questions about what's being seen, and you do that follow-up. So I appreciate that, and look forward to the Commissioner's motion if she decides to put one forward today. Okay, next up is Commissioner Olson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to follow on from what Commissioner Wright-Gilbert was saying, that the bar, and Councillor Brockington as well, the bar that it takes a hospital trip for it to be considered a safety issue is far too high. I guess like Commissioner Wright-Gilbert, a few years back, I was actually attacked and assaulted on a bus, broad daylight, St. Patrick's Day, and I wasn't badly injured, but I was badly shaken up. Special constables came and they were great, but that would not be counted in these measures. And I take Mr. Manconi's comment that we can move a motion, and I would like to do so. I think what the measure that we're looking for, in addition to injuries, because injuries are important, is perhaps a number of incidents that special constables have to attend to, or to investigate, or called to respond to. That would probably give some indication of that as well. It was noted that injuries is consistent. Injuries is one, I did a little bit of research. Injuries are one measurement that is used by a lot of transit agencies, but they also use the number of incidents. They use other measures as well. And I don't think we should be limiting ourselves to one measure. We want to have a safe, affordable, accessible, reliable transit service. As Commissioner Wright-Gilbert and Councillor Brockington said, injuries are just one aspect of safety. So I really, really strongly urge that. And I would move a motion, I'm not sure the procedure behind that, to in fact include the number of incidents that special constables attend to or are asked to respond to in that regard. There are possible other measures as well. The passenger assistance alarm, how many times it is set off or pulled. One thing that I find is lacking in this whole thing is customer satisfaction survey. In Calgary, passengers are actually asked to rate their experience, rate the safety on the transit system. And yet and it's very common across transit agencies, but there's no mention of that here. And I would like to understand why.
Certainly, I can speak to that. When we worked with the steering committee, we talked about the differences between performance measures and satisfaction measures, and the working group was clear with us that what they wanted us to recommend to the commission was measures on concretely how is the transit system doing, measures that that go into, you know, this reflects what customers are actually experiencing and therefore would form their opinion. It is possible to do customer satisfaction surveys. We've looked at ways of doing that. It was something that the previous, you know, before amalgamation and early after amalgamation, something that was previously done sort of in an annual survey of customers. But I'd like you to consider that there may be a distinction between a satisfaction measure and a performance measure, and that they both might have their value, but and do, but that the terms of reference that we were given for this report was about what are the ways that we can report to the Transit Commission on how the transit system is doing and how customers are experiencing the different aspects of the transit system.
Okay, I suggest that if we want to know what customers, what their experience is, asking them is not a bad way. But I'll leave that. I realize this is a work in progress, and that's great. So, but I would suggest that that is something that we should consider. We should be asking the customers what they think, not just the ambulance drivers. With respect to service reliability and schedule adherence, again, I understand that Boston, the MBTA, that transit agency, uses excess wait time. And as I measured before, I actually I could not find others that use excess wait time, but there may well be. But in my looking at things, most transit agencies just use on time. So what are the benefits of excess wait time?
So we're recommending that excess wait time as a measure of regularity of service be used for the frequent services, and that on time as a binary yes, no be used for the less frequent services. The reason that we're recommending this is largely to do with the nature of how customers use the system and how it affects them. For a system that, for a service that runs, bus or train that runs every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, people will walk to the stop, walk to the station with the expectation that the next train will be along, next bus will be along within that period of time. They don't, you know, if a bus is coming by every 5 minutes, they don't go and, oh, I got 4 minutes till that next one comes. On the other hand, if a bus comes every 20 minutes or every half hour, they're going to go out 5 minutes before it comes, or they're going to watch the time and they're going, you know what, I'm going to finish that cup of tea and I'll catch the next one 30 minutes later. So what we want to do is reflect how customers are experiencing it, and not try to reflect it in a way that is against how customers use the service. For the frequent services, what people generally do is walk to the stop on their own time. They arrive fairly consistently as time goes on. You know, or if you remember what Albert and Kent looked like in the old days, the surges of when people got to the bus stop were not based on when the bus was coming. They were based on when they left work. That, you know, big rush out at 3:35 as people packed up from the desks, got down, put their coats on, get down the elevator, and it would drop off again at 3:45. A big pickup at just after 4, huge pickup just after 4, dwindled away by quarter after, 20 after 4. Then another. People were walking to the stop as they got to the stop, and then they go, well, when's that bus coming? Or they look at the new screens that are there at the stations, when's that train coming? And it comes along, and that's fine. When it gets to less frequent service that runs every 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or only several times a day, that's really important. That's an appointment in your day. You want to be on that bus, because if you're not on that bus, your plans for your day are dramatically changed. So the excess wait time as a measure of regularity is the best way in the industry today to reflect that turn up and go type of service that's there on the frequent services. I'm just going to walk out and I'm going to catch the next bus. Now, this is a change, as the counselor has said, this is a change from what's done in the past, and partly a change because with the gigantic amounts of data that we now collect, and the the huge computer power that all of us has at our desk, we can run these calculations, and we can churn out average waiting time bias, affected by standard deviation and averages. We can do all that really fast because we have these super fast computers, which we couldn't do 20 years ago back in beginning of my day, when it was punching numbers into a calculator and looking things up off a piece of paper with a ruler. We've got the data now, and we can provide indicators that are closer to the way that people do experience and use transit service.
Thank you. Again, Boston, to give I guess a truer rendering of the wait time, or more accurate, they actually weight it, if you will, weight, W-E-I-G-H-T, by the number of passengers that they estimate to be in a station or at a major stop. But you are not doing that. Why not? Well,
there's two ways of looking at it, and they're both valid, but they are two different ways of looking at it. One is, what is the customer experience? And what an individual customer experiences is not affected by what the other customers around them are experiencing. And the other is to aggregate it all and say, how good a job overall is the transit system doing at affecting all customers. They're both valid, but I think a way of putting that is, if a bus is I'll go back, if a bus is a minute late at rush hour and that bus is being used by 50 people, there's 50 person minutes of additional delay, which is bad for the city. It's just wasted time in people's lives. If a bus is minute late at another time of day when there's only 10 customers on the bus, then there's only 10 minutes of delay 10 person minutes of delay being caused to the city as an organism. But the customer experienced a minute wait, whether they were one of only 10 people on the bus or whether they're one of 50 people on the bus. Both are possible ways we could report this to you. One of them takes more staff time, more computer power to multiply all of our on-time analysis by the number of people who would normally be on that trip. And then there's an extra distortion that we would have to, which is, do you measure it by the number of people that are normally on the trip, or do you measure it by the number of people who are actually on that trip? Because when a bus is running late, it will usually carry more people because it's picking up more. So there's more. It becomes a more difficult calculation if you try to do the actual measure. If we think of frequent service as more of a flow than an individual appointment, what is the best way for us to report that to you? When we get to the less frequent services, it's something you set in your mind. You almost put it on your calendar. I'm going to be on that 224 trip because that's the trip I want to be on to get downtown by 3 o'clock.
Okay. 1 minute left.
Pardon me?
1 minute left.
Okay. What is a major stop? Like in a residential area in suburban Canada, for example, what would be a major stop for measuring on-time performance?
It would be some of the stops that are used by more customers than others. It would be, think of something coming out of the south end of Canada, it might be the stop near a higher density area where there's 6 customers getting on the bus or 10 customers getting on the bus. It might be the park and ride lot at Eagleson as it goes through there, where maybe another 15 or 20 people get on a bus. It's to make the calculation more reflective of where customers are actually using it. One of the things that isn't useful, which we have done in the past, is, and try to get away from this time, is don't measure on-time performance at a stop where nobody's getting on or off the bus, because if there's nobody there, nobody's experiencing it. So it's a way of trying to go towards measuring it primarily at the points that customers are experiencing it.
Okay. With your reporting schedule, we'll be looking at January 2020 performance data in April 2021. Why not have just 2 times a year, but 6 months per reporting schedule?
Well, the only reason that January 2020 comes up for the first time in April 21 is because it'll be our first report. January, we'd like to present you in all cases with the full calendar year and not just the most recent. So you can see every season, the last spring that we've had, the last summer that we've had, the last fall, the last winter. So when we report to you in April, we'll be reporting to you on 12 months, but when we report 6 months later, we'll also be reporting on 12 months. So each 6-month period will in effect get reported twice, but
Right.
in different context.
But we'll be looking at 15 months previous, for example. Isn't it better to be looking at 6 months, 6 months?
Not to be callous about it, but you don't need to look at all the data we present. You can look at just the most recent 6 months if that's what is of most interest to you. We want to present, we recommend that you receive the other 6 months before that as context, so that you can see something about how things are going over a full year for any seasonality effects. But we'll get the data to you as quickly as we can. The data will come to you. We intend each April, because we'll close the books in December. We'll take the month of January to run the numbers. We'll take the month of February to write the words. We'll put it on the agenda for the next meeting that comes up after that, which is April.
Okay. There are no targets for any of the measures. How will you know when something has to be done or doesn't have to be done?
There are a lot of targets. There are service standards, and it's been many years since the service standards came to the Transit Commission for consideration, but we do always follow the service standards, and those are what everything we do is measured against. What is the walking distance to the nearest stop? How frequently should buses come? How crowded is crowded? So we're always measuring those against service standards. We're not proposing here that there are limits or targets. What we are going to show in the report is, higher is better for many of these measures, lower is better for any of these measures. And if we can show what the experience, here's one of the advantages of comparing to other cities. Why are they doing better in Calgary on this than in Ottawa? Or, hey, we're doing much better in Ottawa here than they are in Calgary. Let's keep doing the things that we're doing well on. Let's see if we can improve on the things that other cities are doing better on, subject to the allocation of budget. But, the ideal for excess waiting time would be 0. But we don't want to stop. And the ideal for service availability is 100%. If there had been in the past arbitrary, we will always get to 98%, or we will always get to 95% of this, or we want to get to, only 5% of that. Well, why would we stop when we're not all the way to perfect? Let's keep going until we get to, you'll never get to perfect, but why stop trying?
Okay, thank you. And one 5-second comment, if I may. Just a suggestion, since safety is an important part of our mandate and OC Transport wants to deliver a safe service, I suggest that some safety measure, whether it's the number of incidents that special constables attend to or asked to respond to, be included in the monthly scorecard. Would certainly keep it front of mind for us and also let our customers know that it is important. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson, and thank you, Mr. Scrimger. On continue avec les commissaires avant de passer aux conseillers. Donc, le commissaire Gower, je pense. Merci.
Merci. Listening to some of the previous comments, in particular from Commissioner Wright-Gilbert, I do think it's worth looking at what other metrics are available in the area of safety. As someone who was on the steering committee, though, I would caution anyone from being too prescriptive at this point as to what those metrics might be. And I was hoping that staff would take as direction, I wrote it down here, that staff consult with transit commissioners and to review and recommend additional performance metrics related to safety that could be included in the twice yearly reports to Transit Commission, and that staff could report back to us at the next Transit Commission meeting with those recommendations. Would staff be amenable to that direction?
Yes, we would.
Okay, I'll forward it to the committee coordinator so he can share it with the committee as well. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. Commissioner Caricato, please.
Hi, I think like many of you have said, this is it's great that we're going to start collecting more data and measuring our performance. I agree with a lot of my colleagues, particularly Councillor Brockington, at the beginning about the need for more aggregated data. And when I looked at the document 1, for example, and you know, we're doing a lot by month for ridership, but not so much by time period, by day, or by service type, or et cetera. And I'm wondering if there's a reason behind that.
I'm just going to flip over and look at that document with you now. The measures that we're proposing to report on by time period, by day type, by service type are the ones that are about service reliability. So are the buses coming evenly spaced? Are the trains running on time? The ones that we're proposing to report on by customer contact type, all the customer contact, you know, how many telephone calls, how many contacts by social media, how many contacts by through the web form, that kind of thing. The ones that we're proposing to report on by month are the numbers that are you know, system numbers, like how many people did the transit system carry in June. What was the per capita ridership in Ottawa last year? These are the kind of numbers that don't lend themselves so much to time of day. If the commission would like to see that broken down, you know, all those data are available. My question in response is, what's most valuable to you as a group to find, to know the state of the system and to decide on the big questions that that come to you.
Great segue into my next point, which is I guess it's really important, of course, for us as a commission to know, but it's also equally important, I think, for the public to know and to be able to go in and look up this data and see raw numbers as opposed to just a rate. Because, you know, again, a rate doesn't mean much when you're going online to see, you know, whether your bus is on time or how frequently it's on time. And again, to Councillor Brockington's point, I think those raw figures are going to be a lot more helpful, not just to us as a commission, but also to the public in general. And I think it also goes to accountability, which we haven't really discussed yet, but data, provides a real opportunity to hold our service accountable and be accountable to our riders. And wondering if you have any comments on that.
I don't, the individual data of whether the individual information of whether a trip is, so when a trip is coming is obviously very valuable to a customer as they're making the trip. It's got to be abstracted to a certain level, in my opinion, to be valuable for any long-term consideration. To say, as Councillor, to give the example that Councillor Brockington was, or at least my interpretation of where he was going was, if we saw that route number such and such is consistently better performing than route number other one, then we should do more of what they're doing on this route over in that route to make it better if we can. But that relies on a certain level of aggregation already, that you've aggregated all the observations on route number 90 or route number 153 or route 245, and you've aggregated them over a day, over a month, over half a year to see that there's a consistent trend there, and that what appeared to be poor reliability was really because there was some sewer work being done on that street on that day. So there's a certain amount of aggregation I think has to be done to make it valuable. The next level, route by route or time by time. The overall question would be, how is OC Transpo doing? And how is OC Transpo doing in comparison to how it did last year, how it did 10 years ago, how other cities are doing? Are there lessons to be learned? If we're getting such and such percent of on time and we're better than every other city of our size, you might say, that's not the place to spend more money. Let's spend more money on something else. I'm not saying you're not going to want it to bring us down to that level, but or you say, look, we're great on this, but we got to get better on that. That's the kind of thing that we can do by bringing together numbers into aggregate form. And clearly there's a sweet spot in there that if you're too disaggregated, all you see are data, you don't get a trend, you don't see information, you don't see what it's giving you. And if you roll it up too far, you've got things that are too summarized. Like, if you can't see variation by route, variation by season, variation by time of day, then you haven't seen much at all. But still, people are going to want to say, and you're probably going to want to hear, is OC Transpo a good system? Are the buses running on time? Are the trains running on time? Are they better this year than they were last year? And that's what the measures here, that's the kind of questions that the measures here might help you to answer. They're not diagnostic measures. These are not the measures that say, let's dig down and figure out exactly what's the problem at the afternoon rush hour getting through the intersection of Fisher and Baseline. There's real work to be done there, and that's done on a project basis. These are meant to be what's the temperature, what's the flavor across the whole system this quarter or this half year versus last half year. All the other data are still there. They take it just takes time and interest. What is the question? Answer the question. This is what we do all the time with the huge amounts of data we collect, and we'll a commissioner or councillor will have a question in this area, a customer has a question in this area, our operations have seen a problem in this area, and we can dig into those further. So different recommendations for different questions is what I would say.
Yeah, thanks for that. Are crowded buses measured and canceled trips?
Yes, so canceled trips are in the trips. That's the availability, that first measure, service availability. How many trips were delivered over the trips that that were scheduled. So, you know, it will be possible in the discussion to talk about what's the cause of those missed trips. You know, we use the term canceled because it's a clear way of explaining that a trip isn't going to come, but it's never a deliberate decision to say we are not going to run that trip and we're canceling it. It's a trip that can't make it because it was delayed on a previous trip. It's a trip that can't make it because there was a mechanical failure with the bus. There's the street is blocked. There's a customer on board who's ill and hadn't been attended to. Those are some of the reasons behind it. And we track all those reasons. But what we want to report is what's important to the customer. Are we getting 96% or 98% of the trips delivered? So that's where trip cancellations will be reflected. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the other half of your question, Commissioner.
Buses.
Overcrowded buses?
Yeah.
So, right. So we're I apologize for not remembering. We have the service standards that we follow, and when trips are getting busier, when trips are getting busier consistently, we increase service. When trips are getting busier on a short-term basis, we can schedule in extra trips. So again, there's a short-term versus long-term question there. On short-term, on today, if a trip is missed, so you know, if there's a bus that normally runs every 10 minutes, one of the buses got held up for a reason, so there's a 20-minute gap there. The one following that gap is going to carry twice as many people as it would normally. It stands a good chance of being overcrowded. That's a one-day problem, but it might not be it might be an operational issue that needs to be dealt with either that day or long-term rather than a scheduled service. On the other hand, population in an area is growing, or the number of people attending a school is increasing. The trips are consistently getting busier. We need to stay ahead of time and schedule a service every 8 minutes rather than every 10 minutes. Both of those things we are looking at and taking action on all the time. If we look at overall, consistently, the service standards that you have set are usually good enough that gives us enough notice that we can arrange for more service, more scheduled service to be on a line a few months before it would otherwise get consistently overcrowded. So that's work that we always do, and we can say that no route is consistent. Well, we can easily say it right now, but if pre-pandemic, most routes were operating in that 85 to 95% of service capacity standard. As they got closer to 95%, that's where we'd look at getting some extra service on those routes so that it would never go over 100. The last one I could remember going over 100 was a route that was an afternoon route from downtown. It's a pre-Line 1 opening, a route that went to Bell's Corners and the south end of Canada, and we had to scramble and put an extra trip in and double up on a trip, and we did, and put bigger buses on, and we did that, and it got us through until we wrote a new schedule. The overcrowded trips that are happening today and how many incidents is another thing that we can't really do very well until we get we can't do consistently in the same way until we get the automatic passenger counters on all the buses, because it's really hard to get a definition of, to have a consistent definition of what is overcrowded. But one thing we can always count on, that we can always count, is did we have to leave a customer behind? If we have to, that would be a major service failure, because that's more than just I was uncomfortable on the bus. That is, I couldn't make my trip. I had to take the next one. And that's something that right now we're not able to measure mechanically. It requires human intervention. And as soon as there's two people making a judgment on the same situation, they'll describe it in two different ways. Sorry for the long answer.
No, I appreciate it. I just want to reiterate, I guess, what we heard from the public delegation about building confidence and explaining the sort of disaccord or the accord between the rider experience and what's actually happening. And I guess that's where I'm trying to go with some of my questions here and my thought behind it. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to support the report. I'll support it for sure, but I would like to continue to drill down, I guess, and work with you guys to develop performance measures that not only we can use to make policy decisions, but again, that reflect that rider experience. And I support Councillor Gower's direction, because I think, this is a good first crack, but we can continue now that we've had this really thoughtful conversation to look at other ways and spur other, I guess, ideas to enhance these performance measures. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caricato. Appreciate your thoughts on this. Next up is Councillor Gower. You've been up once already, so if you don't mind, we're going to go to Councillor Fleury now, non-member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also interested in this, and thank you to the working group on the matter. Just for clarity's sake, does this report rise to council, or does it get approval today and starts being implemented, just from a process point of view?
Does not rise to council.
Does not.
So if members of council, other than, obviously I'm not a member of the commission, but I'm participating today, but what's the best way for us to engage if we had a particular suggestion or interest, Mr. Manconi?
My advice, Chair, is like Councillor Gower and Commissioner Gilbert, either give us direction or give a motion. And I just want to reiterate back to Councillor Brockton's point. I mean, this isn't, we will evolve over time. So what I'm hearing today is that, we did the working group. It sounds like others want their perspective added to it as part of the next iteration. And we're happy, to do a check-in in a year's time. And as part of that, we can go around and connect with every member of council and transit commission and solicit their thoughts. If that's something, I'm in your hands. This has to resonate with the board, with the commission. If it's not what you're looking for, and Pat has nailed it very well. This is a performance reporting. Councillor Olson brings up survey groups. We used to do that. We can do that as a separate initiative, but I would encourage you not to mix customer satisfaction with performance reporting. This is our first attempt working with Commissioner Suds and Commissioner Gower and the chair to give you a performance reporting framework. But if it doesn't connect with you and it's not what you need, we're in your hands. And you may want to give us a general direction to review it in a year's time and to adjust and adapt as we can. But one thing I will, emphasize, I've done a lot of performance reporting in my career. A lot of it gets overly complicated, too many indicators, and there's no focus. We tried to bring you a first cut at focus. I'm hearing great feedback today. Again, we'll take whatever direction you want to give us today.
Thank you for clarifying, Mr. Manconi. So there's 4 principles that I think are the right ones: safety, ridership, customer service, customer reliability. I obviously, as I'm not a commissioner member, I wasn't privy of the group's work, but I think the baseline is there. I just have additional suggestions. So Mr. Olson spoke about the customer service angle, which is driven by complaints and reporting of that. But I wonder if a more clear picture of our customer service is again a survey of because if we get a complaint in and then there's a survey on the complaint that came in with those folks, that's also additional information on, is it resolved? Did we provide adequate follow-up? So there's the survey of why does someone not use transit, or why does someone use transit? What could we improve? Those are external surveys in many respects, but doing kind of a checkpoint of our quality control through internal surveys after the complaints were submitted is also another metric. So putting it out there of your consideration, I know that would be more practical. from my perspective on that data. There's also the service reliability. I'm seeing nothing on cancellation, and it trips me a bit, because I think delay is one factor, but if I'm waiting for a bus and it's canceled, and the reason why it's canceled makes my trip more complicated because it's there's not assurances that there is space in the other bus, is also a factor. So I don't know, Mr. Chair, but I think cancellation, loss of trip, delay impacts in terms of service reliability should also frame the criteria.
I believe that was in there, Councillor Fleury. If you want, maybe Pat can answer your question right now, but I thought that was the first metric.
Yes, it is. Service availability, how many trips were delivered. So how many trips are not delivered is the number canceled.
That's what you're looking for, Councillor Fleury?
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't specific on wording, so maybe that's where I captured. But to me, cancellation is anyhow, if it's there, great. On the a few more questions on the customer injury chart. I think it's been spoken about in a number of points. I as a first aid responder who's always lived near Rideau Street, I've encountered a number of injuries at bus stops for various reasons: heat stroke, broken toes, that never get called for paramedics. So I think the customer injury chart, like in my case, there wasn't even at the time even special constables called upon. So I wonder how you capture something that is concise yet reflective of the risk levels, because I think that's part of the intentions here, which is the right one. In terms of customer trips, the reporting, you're coming on monthly basis, but I think weekly trends are also interesting, right? Like you're going to see a weekly trend when there's the start of school, when we approach the holiday period, when we approach March break, and those in a given month or over the years are hard to identify particular weather patterns or particular trends or particular incidents. So I would encourage us to not just do monthly, but to consider some periods where we do weekly validation. And then my final one, and maybe Mr. Chair, maybe Pat would have comments on my points, or OC would have, is on paratranspo. We seem to want to capture delays after 3 minutes, and there's some value to that, but the 30-minute window seems long to me. When it's nice winter day like today, it could still be long if you're waiting for a particular trip. So can I just get additional clarification on why we believe the 30-minute window is an adequate measurement length?
30 seconds left.
I'm
thanks. Done. So on that one, Mr. Chair, as we talked about earlier, perhaps before Councillor Fleury was able to join the meeting, we're not recommending changes to service standards or policy here. We're recommending ways to measure the service that customers experience when that service is delivered according to, or is intended to be delivered according to, the service standards. The policy of the 30-minute window for scheduling paratransport trips has been in place for many decades. I'm not sure that I'd want to say how long it's been in place, but it's a long-standing direction of the Commission and its predecessor governing bodies. That is the means. That's the way that we book paratransport trips. And so what we're recommending here is that we report back to you consistent with the policy that you have set.
Okay. Any other points, Pat, to what I was raising, or am I off cue on a couple? Or
Mr. Chair, maybe one other observation on Councillor Fleury's. I think he gave some examples of why it's necessary to have a consistent measure for a number of things, such as for safety. Certainly understand, very sympathetic to all the views that were mentioned earlier, that an injury is still an injury even if someone wasn't taken to hospital. but how can we be sure that we're measuring it consistently across all times of day, across all parts of the system? We need to have a discrete thing that we know we're counting. Councillor Fleury mentioned examples of where he's helped people who were injured, and it wasn't reported to any official body at all. It wasn't called to 911. It wasn't called to the special constables. And in that case, it's great that there's other people nearby to help the customer who's injured. Obviously, nobody wants the customer to be injured. But if it wasn't reported anywhere, there'd be no record of it. So it's not open for us to report back to you. So there clearly needs to be a certain level of severity over which we know something has occurred. Calls to special constable as calls to the special constable unit are something that could be reportable along the lines of what Commissioner Wright Gilbert was mentioning for personal security. Those might be the kind of measures, but there needs to be something discrete and countable that we can say there were this number of these per whatever the basis of comparison is. So I think Councillor Fleury gives a good example of why we need countable things to give you performance measures that you can count on.
Okay, I believe I had 30 seconds, so I'll wrap up on the following point, Mr. Chair, which is agree maybe there is a self-reporting tool that could be sort of an attached to that. And then maybe, the commission may want to look at the 30-minute policy around delays for paratranspo. I recognize that Pat's coming back and that's a current policy that you're measuring on, but this in an era of Uber and where our lives are faster, I think 30 minutes reporting is long. So I'll leave it to that, and thank you for the time today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Gower.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just something I want to observe is this has been a really good conversation. There's been a lot that's come up around data, everything from the level of detail in reports to expanding open data to customer surveys to defining what efficient and safe transit really means. We've even touched into policy. It's been a really long meeting though, and I think it's worth pointing out the staff report in front of us today is in response to a motion to establish performance metrics for twice annual public reporting. And we've gone off in a lot of different directions, but I think as we're evaluating, did staff come back to us with what we asked for in the motion? That's what we should be looking at here. I think we need some tweaks and a few have been brought up, but let's keep our focus on performance metrics. This is high level metrics that we've asked staff for, and that's what they've covered in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gower, for pointing that out. You're right. This is just a starting point, and we're certainly not limiting information or anything. Once these reports come in, it'll continue to flow, and the reports will continue to evolve. Councillor Brockington, you're up next.
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly, and thanks to Councillor Gower for that reminder. I think the most important thing we've heard from our customers, certainly this tenure, is the importance for the system to be reliable. Reliability of the system builds confidence, will bring in new customers. That's what we need going forward with our trains and buses. And so to complement the performance measurement metrics that are proposed to us today, I would like to give direction to staff on the following. It's solely about reliability. I've parked everything else, Chair. I'm not pursuing everything else. I just want to focus on this one metric to complement what's proposed to come to us. And it's just two headings, train, bus, and three metrics that would provide us aggregately the entire system. I'm not asking it for by bus, but basically the two headings: on time, late, and canceled. And that will give us aggregate data on the bus system as a whole and aggregated data on the train, the LRT system as a whole. And again, over time, we can compare that. So given that this isn't coming to council, I don't have time to write motions. The one item I want to pursue today is just to acquire that data going forward. So I'd like to provide that direction.
Okay, thank you. Pat, is that something we can do, or do you want park that to the meeting that you'll have with Councillor Brockington afterwards?
We can do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, thank you for that direction, Councillor Brockington.
Now, Chair, sorry, just once we vote on this and before we move on, can I just, and maybe Chair, you can maybe let me make this comment now. I have a comment, just a comment about data that's not related to performance metrics. Can I make just a quick comment now, or do you want me to table that for later?
Would you mind tabling? As Councillor Gower said, it's a late meeting. He needs to get going to another meeting, as do some other commissioners. So if it's not something attached to this report, if you don't mind, and we're certainly going to make sure you have that meeting with staff. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Olson, you had a comment?
Yeah, I would just like, if possible, for Mr. Manconi, Mr. Scrimger to follow up with me with some of my concerns today. Also to seek a clarification, just a quick clarification. Councillor Gower talked about a motion that he is going to move, and I would certainly support that motion. And I thought I heard Mr. Manconi say that things would come back in a year, and I don't want a year to be lost before we potentially refine the reporting system. So I'd just like clarification on that.
Chair, I'm in the committee's hands if you want to review. I mean, we do have to give the data some time to work through the system. A year seemed reasonable in my mind, but
I would just like to see a more robust measure on safety as we go forward, rather than lose any time to one that is, it's fine in itself, but it is not sufficient.
Yeah, my apologies. I heard two things. Councillor Gower gave us direction on safety, and I believe the chair or the committee coordinator is working on a draft motion, unless I'm wrong on that one. So over to Caitlin.
Actually, Mr. Manconi, after you're done with Commissioner Olson, I'm going to ask if it's the will of the committee that we roll everything into that direction that Councillor Gower said, or do we need to go to other motions to add the safety factors in? Okay, so if you could wrap up with Commissioner Olson, then we'll get that clarification from Commission.
That's it on my end.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, then, so that's the question for Commission. If you could just wave hands or what, or hit your button if you want to say something to this. The direction that Councillor Gower gave, is that sufficient for everybody to get the additional information as part of this reporting? And also, of course, the direction Councillor Brockington gave, or is there other motions that people want to bring forward before we do the votes?
Could you clarify the direction from Councillor Gower, just so to remind us? It has been a bit of a long meeting, so my brain's slightly gone to mush.
Okay, Councillor Gower, do you mind reading it again?
Yeah, if you'll give me just a moment, I'll pull it out of my Transit Commission file here. Whoops. Okay, here it is. It was that staff be directed to consult with transit commissioners and to review and recommend additional performance metrics related to safety that could be included in the twice yearly reports to Transit Commission, and that staff report back with recommendations at the next Transit Commission meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. Sorry about that, everyone. So given Councillor Gower's direction to staff, I feel comfortable with withdrawing my motion from consideration and having a conversation with OC Transpo management to have my proposed metrics added to the performance management to be recommendations be brought back at the next Transit Commission meeting.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. Okay, so then if we're done with this, can we have a vote? Is the report carried? Carried? Okay, thank you, everybody. Appreciate that.
Carried.
Sorry, Vice Chair, did you have something you needed?
No, I voted yes, Chair. I voted carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the next item in the agenda is the amendments to the transit bylaw. Believe there's no presentation, but we do have one delegate. Is Nick Grover here with us today? Nick? Eric?
He's joining now, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, he was in a moment ago, but he doesn't seem to be among the panelists at this time. I may try to follow up with him if the commission would allow the indulgence.
Okay.
And Chair, I just want to advise you and my fellow commissioners that I regretfully have to leave for a 1 o'clock meeting as I had advised you earlier. So thank you, Chair. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Maybe we can go ahead to questions from for staff. Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one quick question. It was on page 4. Staff reviewed the applicability of the provisions to the potential carriage of the electric kick scooters on transit property, and that you're recommending that electric scooters may only be ridden, now this is in transit stations, may only be ridden on sidewalks and pathways on transit property where specifically permitted by signage. That did jump out at me. I actually didn't support the e-scooter pilot going forward, mostly because of my serious concern about scooters being ridden on sidewalks and the danger that posed, especially to our residents who have visual impairment, who we heard from, and also seniors and others who are less mobile. So I'm just curious exactly what that means and how that might contradict what we're trying to do in other areas.
Mr. Chair, we're trying to be as consistent as we can be with what the Transportation Committee has decided for pathways all across the city. The idea here is that electric scooters would by default not be permitted to be ridden on a pathway at a station unless there's a specific provision made. And the reason we wanted to allow that possibility is some of the stations have long pathways on transit property or on city property to approach the station. So where there's a pathway which is several hundred meters long and which is wide enough where it might be useful for us to allow people to ride that scooter in safety up to the point where they would be either stepping off it to walk with it or where they'd be parking it for someone else to take, just to allow the possibility that we could permit it somewhere. And, I'm thinking of stations like,
I wonder if you could give me an example of a station with a sidewalk. Pathways, I understand, because they're allowed on pathways like NCC MUPs, not NCC, but multi-use pathways. So I just wonder if you can give me an example of a sidewalk that you might want to allow an electric scooter on, because that's where I have some clear difficulty with it. It's not the pathways.
I have to defer to legal services to comment on what the legal definition of a sidewalk is, but I would consider most of the approaches to transit stations either pathways, walkways, in that general term. I think if a sidewalk is something that is always on the side of a municipal road, then it's by definition always on the public right of way and not on transit property.
So I wonder then if we could change that to walkways and pathways and just remove the word sidewalk. It really is something that, that does generate a tremendous amount of concern. And I just don't want it to be misinterpreted in any way. So let's say up here at Bayview, it's kind of it goes from a multi-use pathway, you go onto a sidewalk for a little while, and then you get into the station. Wouldn't ever want it to be construed that you can act like you can be on the multi-use pathway, but you can't come over to the sidewalk right in front of the station. So I think that just with the word sidewalk in there, it's a bit of an alarm for me and for others. So I wonder if we could make that walkways and pathways, because then it's pretty clear that it's only those approaches within transit property leading up to, because I mean, pathways are allowed anyway outside of the NCC ones, like multi-use pathways.
I see Naz is here from Legal Services. Is there Naz? Is there any definition that's meaningful in law?
Chair, a suggestion. I think the commissioner points out a very good point. We're trying to mirror everything that the Transportation Committee approved under the bylaw. So if it's comforting, we can take that as direction that we should mirror all the rules that was approved by the Transportation Committee, and we'll clean up the language. It's a good point. We don't want sidewalks in the mix, and rather than get into a big drawn out discussion today, just to if it supports the intent, we'll take it as direction to clean all that up.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. It's small, but I think it is significant. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor. Seeing no other questions on this, do we have the delegate available yet, Eric, or no?
Yes, he's online, Chair.
Okay.
Yes,
go ahead, Nick, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry for that glitch, and thanks to Caitlin for making sure I could be here. So I'm actually here representing Free Transit Ottawa. We're a local group committed to free, reliable, and accessible transit in Ottawa. So the report from Mr. Manconi states that encouraging the use of cycling and public transit helps to reduce reliance on automobiles, which in turn reduces emissions. We fully agree with this statement. Unfortunately, we seem to be failing at the second part of it. City Council declared a climate emergency in 2019. In order to live up to that commitment, we really need to get serious about actually encouraging public transit citywide beyond just the LRT. OC Transpo has been providing a very unreliable service since well before the pandemic. Now we face the additional crisis of low ridership. In response to both, we're asking the Commission to implement more dedicated bus-only lanes throughout the city. We heard earlier on this call about the role of traffic congestion and how it plays in messing up bus schedule reliability. But when buses have their own separate lane, they avoid being caught in a sea of traffic, and it creates a faster, more reliable service route and a more attractive service all around. Shorter trips also mean less time on the bus and less exposure to other passengers during the pandemic for the workers who still rely on this service. Bus lanes are an immediate public safety measure as well as a long-term investment in better transit service. As we know, since we have some in the city already, bus lanes are very cheap to make. But to
Sorry, Nick, if I could just interrupt, we're not dealing with bus lanes here. This item that you're speaking to is the transit bylaw, and it has to do with electric kick scooters. And the second part has to do with the drones over transit property. Did you have anything to say to those two issues?
I was speaking to the sections about climate change and accessibility. They're in the report for this item. So I wanted to make linkages to that as they were part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
So in order to pay for any of this stuff, and we also spoke earlier about the lack of funds, we should look to road expansion budgets. Strandherd Drive will cost about 113 million for a mere 3 kilometers of road, expanding it from 2 lanes to 4. Contrary to the city's goals, widening actually encourages driving by inducing demand for it. Instead, we need to shore up our transit capacity. A serious plan to curb emissions, which cycling will of course contribute to, but we also have to consider challenging the dominance of the car, and that means more city spaces for buses. On the point of accessibility, which was brought up in the report, we need to again think of it bigger. A focus on cycling is of course welcomed, but we need to remember that the 15-minute city ethos goes beyond this. Obviously, 15 minutes is different for everybody, and paratranspo users face chronic issues with the service. We're demanding that the expansion of paratranspo fleet by 40 buses is implemented, and the elimination of bus fares for all riders using ODSP and OW is offered not just as a lifeline during the pandemic, but also as a general policy to improve transit service. Making it easier to pay for fares is not enough. We need to be reducing fares and
Okay,
allocating
Nick,
funding.
this really has nothing to do with what we're here to deal with today. So if you didn't have comments on the report, well, I'll thank you very much. We'll see if we have any questions for you. Is there any questions for the delegation?
I was just wrapping up anyway.
Are you going to wrap up related to the report, though? Because you're really drifting off the report by quite a bit here.
Well, I apologize, but I felt it was connected to some of the language in the report and the broader discussion surrounding priorities here in the city. So I was just going to thank everybody for their time and ask that they protect and expand transit in our city.
Okay, thank you. Councilor McKenney has questions for you, so if you could just hold on.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Just one. Thanks, Nick, for coming out and speaking to us about the report in front of us today. Just in your opinion, Nick, do you think that the accessibility to other modes of transportation, bike share, e-scooter share, in and around transit will help to improve ridership? Do you think that will lead to a better ridership level?
It certainly could. I just think we need to implement it as part of a bigger strategy. I think buses have been unreliable for quite a long time. Of course, every part is good, but we do know from our own city and others that things like bus lanes or community routes, these are really big steps. They may seem simple, but they're big steps toward the bigger project of reliability. So we of course support making it easier to bring bikes and scooters, but we do want to dream bigger.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor McKenney. And seeing no other questions, Nick, thank you for coming out today and raising your concerns. So the commission, the recommendations are that the Transit Commission recommend that Council, 1, confirm and extend the delegation of authority to the General Manager of Transportation Services to allow and regulate the carriage of bicycles, electric kickstarters, and power-assisted bicycles, onboard old train cars, and the transit property, and amend the transit bylaw as required and as further described in this report. And 2, amend the transit bylaw to prohibit the use of unmanned air vehicles on or over transit property where a permit has not been issued by the General Manager of Transportation Services as further described in the report. The recommendations as amended, carried?
Carried.
Carried, yep.
Okay,
Carried.
Thank you, everybody. So that item will be considered by Council on February 24th of this year. We carried the next item, so now we are on to the in-camera items. I believe there's nothing in camera. Any notice of motions? Okay, seeing none. Inquiries, does anybody have any inquiries? Okay, thank you. Other business. Briefly, I'd like to mention that Pat Scrimger sent an email on February 5th updating members of council and the commission on the progress of the commission's working groups. Is there any other business, keeping in mind that adding an item to the agenda would require 2/3 vote on by the commission?
Mr. Chair, it's Commissioner Tierney here. I just wanted to, with your permission,
I was coming to you next, if that's okay, Councillor Tierney.
Yes,
you're
Mr.
the
Chair.
next item. We just need to clear that memo that went around towards regarding the working groups. If anybody had any motions to that. Okay, seeing none, sorry, Councillor Tierney, please go ahead on that matter.
Great, Alan. It's been a long day. I'll keep it very brief. I just wanted to acknowledge the passing of Heather Stacher in January, a very strong transit advocate. At her wake, there was many great stories of the work that she's done, and I just wanted to make sure it was included within today's commission meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney, and appreciate you bringing that to our attention too, very much. Okay, can I have a motion for adjournment, please?
Motion
We
to
don't have a
adjourn.
vice chair, so I need anybody can move that motion that wishes.
Motion to adjourn.
Yep, happy
Thank you,
to.
Commissioner Olson. Okay, carried on the motion. Thank you. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, March 17th. And just for everybody's information, that is part of the March break. But with the March break being moved now to become an April break, we decided to leave that meeting there. Hopefully it's okay with everybody. If there are concerns around that, please get a hold of me and we can try to do a reschedule. But right now the choice was to just hold that date because we do have important business coming forward in March.
We're green.
Okay.
We're green, everybody.
We're green. Thank you, Councillor Brockington. That's true. Okay, folks, see y'all later. Thank you for participating, and thank you, Mr. Manconi, to you and your team for all the work done in advance of this today.